నేను జాయిన్ అయినావు కదా. థ్యాంక్ యూ. Yeah, we are going live on Facebook now. Thank you. Telangana Jana Vedika ప్రతి ఆదివారం నిర్వహించుకునే సదస్సులో భాగంగా ఇది 439వ సదస్సు. ఈ సదస్సులో భారతీయ బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగంపై వాటికి సవాళ్లు అనే అంశంపై చర్చించడానికి ఆంధ్ర యూనివర్సిటీలో ప్రొఫెసర్ గా ఈ మధ్యనే రిటైర్ అయిన ప్రొఫెసర్ ఋషికేష్ రావు గారు కామర్స్ ప్రొఫెసర్ గా రిటైర్ అయినారు. వారికి అపారమైన అనుభవం ఉన్నది. వారిని ప్రాపర్ గా ఇంట్రడ్యూస్ మన ప్రొఫెసర్ డాక్టర్ ఆకుతోట శ్రీనివాస్ గారు మోడరేట్ చేసినప్పుడు వారిని ఇంట్రడ్యూస్ చేస్తారు. అయితే ఈరోజు మనం ఎంచుకున్న అంశంపై చర్చ చేయడానికి మన ఆహ్వానాన్ని మన్నించి మనకు ఇమీడియట్లీ యాక్సెప్టెన్స్ ఇచ్చిన ప్రొఫెసర్ ఋషికేష్ రావు గారికి స్వాగతం, సుస్వాగతం. వారికి మీ అందరి తరఫున ధన్యవాదాలు తెలియజేస్తున్నా. అయితే మనము ఈరోజు బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగంపై ఎందుకు చర్చ చేయాలనుకున్నప్పుడు దీన్ని మొత్తం బ్యాంకింగ్ మూలాలపై సార్ చర్చిస్తారు. దాంట్లో నేను మీ దాంట్లో ఎక్కువ చర్చ చేయడానికి పెద్దగా నేను చేసేది ఏం లేదు. అయితే ఒక్కటి మాత్రం చెప్పదలుచుకున్నది ఏంటంటే బ్యాంకింగ్ ఈ రోజున్న వ్యవస్థ, మనము బ్యాంకింగ్ అంటే 1940s ప్రీమియర్ బ్యాంక్ నుంచి స్టార్ట్ అయిన మన బ్యాంకింగ్ వ్యవస్థ 1969లో నేషనలైజేషన్, తర్వాత ఇప్పుడు మళ్ళీ ప్రైవేటైజేషను, అమాల్గమేషను, ఇవన్నీ చేస్తున్న తరుణంలో అసలు కామన్ మ్యాన్ కు బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగం ఎంత దగ్గర అవుతున్నది, నిజంగానే బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగం ఈరోజు మనకు బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగంలో కామన్ మ్యాన్ అలా ఉన్న ఈ లిబరలైజ్డ్ ఎకానమీ పరిస్థితుల్లో, పోస్ట్ లిబరల్ ఎకానమీ పాలసీలో ఎలాగా మనం ఈ రోజు కామన్ మ్యాన్ బ్యాంక్ లో ఉన్నాదు. అట్లనే బ్యాంక్ లో మనం అనేకమైన స్కామ్స్ చూస్తున్నాం. విజయ్ మాల్యా కావచ్చు, ఇంకో ఆయన కావచ్చు, లక్షల కోట్ల రూపాయల ప్రజాధనాన్ని స్కామ్స్ ద్వారా పోవడం మనం చూస్తున్నాం. దాని మీద ఋషికేష్ రావు గారు వారికి ఉన్న అపారమైన అనుభవం. ఎందుకంటే నేను ఎక్కువ మాట్లాడితే ఈ స్పీకర్ కు ఛాన్స్ ఇవ్వనట్టు ఉంటుంది కాబట్టి నేను వారికి వారిని ఎక్కువ వెయిట్ చేయనీయకుండా, తర్వాత ప్రొఫెసర్ బాలమోహన్ గారు కేవలం ఒక హాఫ్ అన్ అవరే ఉంటా అన్నారు. హాఫ్ అన్ అవర్ లో ఆల్రెడీ 10 minutes అయిపోయింది. వారు కూడా ఋషికేష్ రావు గారి ఓపెనింగ్ రిమార్క్స్ ఇంటా అన్నారు. కాబట్టి నేను ఎక్కువ మాట్లాడను. తెలంగాణ జన వేదికలో ఆనవాయితీ ప్రకారము మన రాజ్యాంగ పీఠికను చదివి నేను మన ప్రొఫెసర్ ఆకుతోట శ్రీనివాసులు గారికి మోడరేట్ చేస్తూ స్పీకర్ గారితో మాట్లాడవలసిందిగా కోరుతున్నాను. రాజ్యాంగ పీఠిక చదివినాక నేను వారికి అందజేస్తాను. రాజ్యాంగ పీఠిక. భారత ప్రజలమైన మేము భారతదేశాన్ని సర్వసత్తాక, సామ్యవాద, లౌకిక, ప్రజాస్వామ్య గణతంత్ర రాజ్యంగా నిర్మించుకోవడానికి పౌరులందరికీ సాంఘిక, ఆర్థిక, రాజకీయ న్యాయాన్ని, ఆలోచన, భావ ప్రకటన, విశ్వాసము, ధర్మము, ఆరాధనల స్వతంత్రాన్ని, అంతస్తులోను అవకాశాల్లోనూ సమానత్వాన్ని చేకూర్చడానికి, వారందరిలో వ్యక్తిత్వ గౌరవాన్ని, జాతీయ సమైక్యతను సంరక్షిస్తూ సౌభాతృత్వాన్ని పెంపొందించడానికి మన ఈ రాజ్యాంగ పరిషత్తులో 1949 నవంబర్ 26వ తేదీన ఎంపిక చేసుకుని శాసనంగా రూపొందించుకున్న ఈ రాజ్యాంగాన్ని మేము సమర్పించుకుంటున్నాం. అంటే ఈ రాజ్యాంగ పీఠికలేనే మొత్తం రాజ్యాంగాన్ని అంబేద్కర్ గారు ఆ రోజు రాసినప్పుడు ఈ రాజ్యాంగ పీఠికలనే మొత్తం రాజ్యాంగాన్ని మిడిచున్నారు. అందుకే తెలంగాణ జన వేదిక ప్రతి మీటింగ్ లోనూ రాజ్యాంగ పీఠికను చదివినిపించడం ఒక ఆనవాయితీగా చేసుకున్నది. ఇప్పుడు మీ అందరికీ తెలుసు, ఈ రోజు ఈ రాజ్యాంగంలో నిజంగానే ఈ రోజు జరుగుతున్న పాలన రాజ్యాంగబద్ధంగా జరుగుతుందా, మనం పౌరులందరికీ ఆర్థిక స్వతంత్రాన్ని ఇస్తున్నామా, భావ ప్రకటన స్వతంత్రాన్ని ఇస్తున్నామా అనేది మనము ఆలోచించుకోవాల్సిన అవసరం ఉన్నదని నేను భావిస్తూ ఇప్పుడు డాక్టర్ ఆకుతోట శ్రీనివాసులు గారిని మోడరేట్ చేస్తూ స్పీకర్ ప్రొఫెసర్ రిషికేష్ రావు గారిని ఇంట్రడ్యూస్ చేసి వారిని సభను కంటిన్యూ చేయవలసిందిగా కోరుతున్నాను. ధన్యవాదాలు. థ్యాంక్ యూ సో మచ్.
థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్. థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్. తెలంగాణ జనవిక 439వ జూమ్ ఆన్లైన్ మీటింగ్ కు విచ్చేసినటువంటి ప్రొఫెసర్ ఋషికేశ్వరరావు గారికి మరియు వేదిక సభ్యులు, తెలంగాణ వేదిక సభ్యులు, మిత్రులందరికీ నా సాయంకాల నమస్కారాలు తెలియజేస్తూ అందరికీ స్వాగతం, సుస్వాగతం. ఇవాళ చాలా ముఖ్యమైనటువంటి అంశాన్ని మనం ప్రధానంగా ఎన్నుకోవడం అనేటువంటి జరిగింది. ఇవాళ భారతదేశం లోపల బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగం ఎలాంటి సవాళ్ళను ఎదుర్కొంటుంది, అసలు బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగంలో వస్తున్నటువంటి మార్పులు ఏ రకమైనటువంటి మార్పులు వస్తున్నాయి, ఈ మార్పుల వలన సామాన్య ప్రజలు లేదా మధ్యతరగతి, పేద ప్రజల యొక్క ఉపయోగాలు ఏమైనా ఉన్నాయా అనేటువంటిది మన ముందు ఉన్నటువంటి పెద్ద సవాలుగా చెప్పుకోవచ్చు. ప్రధానంగా ముఖ్యంగా భారతదేశం స్వతంత్ర నాటికి అప్పటికే ఉన్నటువంటి బ్యాంకింగ్ వ్యవస్థ సుమారుగా ఒక 60 సంవత్సరాల కాలం పాటు మొత్తంగా ప్రభుత్వ రంగంలో ఉండేటువంటి బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగం అంతా కూడా ప్రధానంగా 1991వ సంవత్సరం తర్వాత ఈ వచ్చినటువంటి నూతన ఆర్థిక విధానాలు, ఎల్పిజి లిబరలైజేషన్, గ్లోబలైజేషన్, ప్రైవేటైజేషన్ లోపల ఈ యొక్క ఆర్థిక విధానాల మూలం లోపల ప్రధానంగా దేశం లోపల బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగంలో కొత్త పోకడలు అనేటువంటివి ప్రారంభమైన చెప్పడంలో ఏమాత్రం సందేహం లేదు. ఎందుకు అంటే ఇవాళ ప్రపంచం లోపల అనేకమైనటువంటి మార్పులు వచ్చేస్తున్నాయి. దాంట్లో భాగంగానే భారతదేశంలో కూడా బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగంలో పెద్ద ఎత్తున మార్పులు వస్తున్నాయి. కానీ ఈ మార్పుల వలన సామాన్య ప్రజలు లేదా పేద వర్గాలు లేదా చేతి వృత్తులు కానీ లేదా కుటీర పరిశ్రమలు కానీ ఏమైనా బ్యాంకుల తరఫున ఏమైనా ఆర్థిక సహాయం అందజేస్తున్నాయా, అప్పులు కానీ ఇస్తున్నాయా అంటే ప్రస్తుత తరుణంలో చూస్తున్నట్లయితే నాటికి నేటికి అనేకమైనటువంటి మార్పులు అనేటువంటివి మన కళ్ళ ముందు కనబడుతున్నాయి. మనం కనుక ప్రధానంగా ఈ మధ్య కాలంలో చూస్తే, అంటే ఈ యొక్క 10-15 సంవత్సరాల కాలంలో కనుక చూస్తే, మనం పెట్టినటువంటి పెట్టుబడులు ఏవైతే ఉన్నాయో, మన యొక్క పొదుపు డబ్బులు ఏవైతే బ్యాంకులలో వేసుకున్నామో ఆ పొదుపు డబ్బులను ఇవాళ బడా పారిశ్రామికవేత్తలందరూ కూడా వాళ్ళ కష్టార్జితాన్ని అంతా కూడా నొక్కివేసినటువంటి పరిస్థితి వాళ్ళ మనకు చాలా స్పష్టంగా కనబడుతుంది. ఎందుకంటే మనకు విజయ్ మాల్యా గాని, నీరవ్ మోడీ గాని ఇలాంటి వ్యక్తులను కనుక చూసుకున్నట్లయితే కొన్ని లక్షల కోట్ల రూపాయలను ఎగవేసి బ్యాంకులకు ఎగవేసినట్లయితే ఇది ప్రభుత్వానికి ఎగవేసినట్టు కాదు, ఇది సామాన్య ప్రజల యొక్క డబ్బును వాళ్ళు ఎగవేసుకొని బయట దేశాలకు ఎగిలిపోయారు. ఇలా చూస్తూ పోతే కొన్ని లక్షలాది కోట్ల రూపాయలను వాళ్ళు ఎగవేసుకున్నారు. ఈ డబ్బు అంతా కూడా సామాన్య ప్రజల యొక్క డబ్బే అని చెప్పడంలో కూడా ఏమాత్రం సందేహం లేదు. అయితే ఒక సామాన్యుడు అప్పు తీసుకొని కట్టలేని ఎడలా అతని ఇల్లును వేలం వేసేటువంటి పరిస్థితి మనకు కనబడుతుంది. అదే వేలాది కోట్లు, లక్షలాది కోట్లు అప్పు తీసుకున్నటువంటి ఈ యొక్క కార్పొరేట్ సెక్టర్ అధినేతలు ఎవరైతే ఉన్నారో వాళ్ళ యొక్క డబ్బును మాత్రం వసూలు చేయడానికి బ్యాంకులు ముందుకు రాకపోవడం అనేటువంటిది కూడా ఇది ఒక పెద్ద సమస్యగా మన ముందు కనబడుతుంది. కాబట్టి ఇప్పటికైనా ప్రభుత్వాలు, అటు కేంద్ర ప్రభుత్వం కానీ ఇటు రాష్ట్ర ప్రభుత్వాలు కానీ ఈ యొక్క బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగాన్ని ఇంకా పరిపుష్టిగా దాని యొక్క బలిష్టంగా బలవంతమైనటువంటి వ్యవస్థగా రూపుదించడానికి ప్రయత్నం చేయాలి. కానీ దురదృష్టం ఏంటంటే 91 తర్వాత ఈ దేశం లోపల అనేక ప్రైవేట్ రంగం పరమైనటువంటి బ్యాంకులే ఇంకా వస్తున్నాయి. ఇవాళ దాంట్లో భాగంగానే ఐసిఐసి కానీ, ఐడిఎఫ్సి కానీ, హెచ్డిఎఫ్సి కానీ ఇలాంటి బ్యాంకులు, ఇంటింటికో బ్యాంకు కూడా ఇవాళ చార్మినార్ బ్యాంక్ అని, లక్ష్మీ బ్యాంకు అని ఇలాంటి బ్యాంకులన్నీ కూడా ఒకవైపు దివాలా తీస్తూ ఈ ప్రభుత్వం పైకి నెట్టివేయడం వల్ల సామాన్య ప్రజలు ఎంతోగానో నష్టపోతున్నారు. సామాన్యులు పొదుపు చేసుకున్నటువంటి డబ్బులన్నీ కూడా వాళ్ళు వృధాగా పోతున్నారు. కాబట్టి ప్రభుత్వాలు ఇప్పటికైనా ఈ బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగం అంతా కూడా పూర్తిగా ప్రభుత్వ రంగంలోనే ఉంచవలసినటువంటి ప్రాధాన్యత ఎంతైనా ఉంది. ప్రధానంగా విద్య, వైద్యము ప్రభుత్వమే చూసుకోవాలి. ఆర్థిక రంగాన్ని కూడా, ఈ బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగాన్ని కూడా పూర్తిగా ప్రభుత్వమే చూసుకుంటే బాగుంటుంది. ఎందుకంటే ప్రజలు ఎవరైతే ఉంటారో వాళ్ళ యొక్క పొదుపు పెట్టుబడి పెట్టడం వల్ల వాళ్లకు ఆ యొక్క గ్యారంటీని ఇచ్చేటువంటి బాధ్యత కూడా ప్రభుత్వాలు తీసుకోవాలి. అప్పుడు మాత్రమే బ్యాంకింగ్ వ్యవస్థలో కొద్ది మేరకు మార్పులు జరుగుతాయి. కానీ ఈ మధ్య కాలంలో టెక్నాలజీ ఎక్కువ రావడం వల్ల, టెక్నాలజీ ఉపయోగం వల్ల చాలా మార్పులు వచ్చాయి. ఇవాళ ఏటీఎంలు కానీ, ఈ యొక్క ఆన్లైన్ బ్యాంకింగ్ సిస్టమ్ వల్ల కానీ ఉద్యోగ అవకాశాలు అనేటువంటిది బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగంలో పెద్ద ఎత్తున కోల్పోతున్నారు. ఇవాళ ఈ యొక్క ఏటీఎంలు కానీ, ఆన్లైన్ బ్యాంకింగ్ సిస్టమ్ వల్ల ఉపాధి అవకాశాలు అటువంటి లక్షలాది ఉపాధి అవకాశాలు కోల్పోతున్నారు. అనేటువంటిది చాలా ప్రధానంగా మనం చెప్పుకునేటువంటి అంశంగా నేను తెలియజేసుకుంటూ భారతదేశ బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగం లోపల సవాళ్లు అనేటువంటి అంశం పైన ప్రొఫెసర్ ఋషికేశ్వరరావు గారు, వారు డిపార్ట్మెంట్ ఆఫ్ కామర్స్, ఆంధ్ర యూనివర్సిటీ విశాఖపట్నంలో వారు పనిచేశారు. వారు అకాడమిక్ సెనేట్ మెంబర్ గా కూడా వారు పనిచేశారు. ప్రధానంగా వారు హెడ్ డిపార్ట్మెంట్ గాను, బోర్డ్ ఆఫ్ స్టడీ చైర్పర్సన్ గాను వారు పనిచేశారు. సుమారుగా వారి దగ్గర అనేక మంది రీసెర్చ్ స్కాలర్ పనిచేశారు. వారు దేశ విదేశాలలో అనేక వ్యాసాలను కూడా రాయడం జరిగింది బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగం మీద. వారిని భారతదేశ బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగంలో సవాళ్లు అనేటువంటి అంశం మీద వారిని మాట్లాడవలసిందిగా వారిని సాదరంగా ఆహ్వానిస్తున్నాను. ప్రొఫెసర్ ఋషికేశ్వరరావు గారిని సాదరంగా ఆహ్వానిస్తున్నాను. థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్.
సార్ మాట్లాడండి సార్.
So at the outset, so I must be grateful to the Telangana Jana Vedika, so for giving me this wonderful opportunity to share some of thoughts so on the subject of banking in the context of emerging challenges in the Indian banking sector. And in fact, really today I am blessed for the simple reason, say my teacher, and who actually taught me the banking subject at the university level, and who is responsible for my entire academic career on the Andhra University campus, almost for 37 years. He is none other than Professor V. Balmohandas Garu, the former Vice Chancellor of Acharya Nagarjuna University. My hearty pranams to you, sir. And sir, the members of this Jana Vedika and convener Ramara Garu and Srinivasal Garu and other distinguished participants. So before straight away touching the focus point on these challenges in the Indian banking sector. So to begin with, let me dwell on the very brief history about the Indian banking system. So right from independence, of course, with a major focus on the post-reform period. So after attaining the independence, we're back in year 1947. And after that, the Indian banking system, so it was no doubt a private dominated, and a very, say few, the public sector banks, like maybe in the early part of the 50s, the State Bank of India. But particularly after the very dynamic move initiated by the then government under the stewardship of the late Prime Minister, Madam Indira Gandhi, so towards the nationalization of the major 14 private banks, that really heralded a new chapter, because there is no second thought about the role and the contribution that's to be made by the commercial banking system in any country in terms of acceleration of its economic growth and development. No doubt many a time we used to say the banking institutions have to play intermediary role, but at the same time, they are the vehicles through which the process of economic growth and development has to be accelerated. So, and in fact, in the post-nationalization period, so particularly major focus on the reaching the banking, so business even to the nook and corner of the country, because prior to the nationalization, say many underprivileged and in many areas, particularly the rural or the remote parts of the country, hilly areas, tribal areas, even in semi-urban areas, were not touched by the banking system. For the simple reason, at the time, the banking system was to be majorly, say, dominated by the private sector. So as a result, as a matter of common sense, the private sector is always to locate their branches at the places where we're sure of getting the prosperity and the potential banking developments. But after the nationalization in the year 1969 and 1980, the focus was shifted to the class banking, and actually it's a mass banking. So where, the weaker sections of the population and the majority of the underprivileged sections of the population used to get the benefit out of it. maybe in terms of rapid branch expansion program. And they point the people living in the remote areas so found an opportunity to improve their saving habits by means of keeping their surplus funds with the banking channels. And thereby the banks also found that their deposit base was quite wide enough. And as a result, they improved the size of lendings to the general public, particularly to the direction sections of the population as per the government directives. And as a result, it was more often, so people used to say the priority sector lending. At that time, so actually the small scale industrial units or even the agriculture sector, the small and the marginal farmers, and even the people living in the underprivileged sections of the population. So these all things used to get the major benefits. And in fact, as a part of statutory reserve requirements, say stipulation that the Reserve Bank of India imposed a stipulation on the head of each and every commercial bank, at least they must earmark the 40% of their total advances in favor of the priority sector. So there was no doubt that the more zeal and enthusiasm that was exhibited by the public sector bank, which almost with the two phases of the bank's nationalization. At the time, the banking sector in the public sector was able to control the 90% of the total Indian banking system. And after that, by the time the 1985 and 86, there was some kind of what you call is weaknesses that was surfaced on the face of the Indian banking system in terms of the economics unviability. Majority of the banks, in terms of their branches, in terms of their businesses, so are actually not on sound footing. In the sense, the majority of the bank branches were to run on the lines of incurring losses. So naturally, even the banks, if they wanted to say extend their positive contribution to the society in general, first of all, their existence, they must survive on a viable footing. So in order to keep that in the mind, so at the time the Reserve Bank of India, as an apex bank, so initiated certain kind of a consolidated measures that were taken place between the 1985 to 1990. At the fag end of the 90 and the beginning of the 91, as we are aware, that there was an external economic crisis that was taking place in India. And by the time the government of India used to have just hardly 1.5 billion US dollars in terms of the foreign exchange reserves, there was really people were say some kind of concerns they expressed. And as a result, what happened was in order to say negative this situation, the government thought of say introducing the lot of economic reform, the sweeping economic reforms. And as a result, at the time, so we had the new industrial policy, new monetary policy, new fiscal policy, and the new export and import policy. And in order to implement all these policies with a rather success, the one important system that should be addressed is nothing but the financial system. Unless or until we correct whatever the drawbacks of the limitations of the financial system, it was a hard nut for the authorities at the central level or at the state level to take care of the successful execution of all these economic policies. That was the reason why they focused on how to say improve the health of the financial system, out of which the banking system occupied very, very important role, because the more often, so we used to say that the 80% of the total financial system in India was to be identified with the banking system. So if we wanted to make the financial system is really a healthy one in India, we have to make an attempt to restructure and to see that the wheels of the banking industry must be moved on right footing. That's the reason why the focus was placed on the restructuring of the banking system in this country. And at the same time, when you see that all the economic policies so were unveiled by the government at the center in favor of the globalization, as a result, we find the element of privatization, the element of liberalization to reach the ultimate stage of the globalization. So naturally, the same thing will definitely be, say, felt on the banking system. That's the reason why instead of straight away injecting a lot of economic reforms, the wise thing that the government at the time did was that they constituted very powerful, say, committee, a high-powered committee under the chairmanship of Mr. Narasimha. and in the caption like the Committee on Finance System in the year 1991. And this committee suggested to the central government and various reform measures. So since 1991 and onwards, the different types of reforms, not only in the year 1991, again in the year 1998, the banking sector reforms were also announced. And as part of that, a major focus on the banking sector in terms of the successful implementation of reforms. So we're in the areas of the first thing is viability of the Indian banking system. And at the same time, when you say that we are actually opening our economy to the rest of the world in the pretext of the globalization, the Indian banking system is also susceptible to the global banks. So when you say that the Indian banks are to compete with the global banks in each and every respect, whether it is the procurement of the resources or the deployment of the credit or even maintenance of the manual of the credit system, these all things, we must maintain some sort of a compatibility. So in order to do that, and in fact, at the international level, there are certain international banking standards from time to time are to be developed by a very prominent popular agency like BIS, the Bank for International Settlement. So these things actually ultimately were kept in mind. And that's the reason why they made focus. The first thing what they, in terms of the reforms was, one is the deregulation. Because earlier, whatever the interest rate that are charged by the banking system to the general public, purely basing on the directives that are flown from the Reserve Bank of India. But once you say that some kind of a flexibility that should be given to the banking system, so that's the reason why the deregulation, that means the task of determination of the interest rates by the Reserve Bank of India, was actually withdrawn, and actually there's some kind of a flexibility that is given to the Indian banking institutions. So as a result, what happened? Today we say that the interest rates both on the deposits and advances are not purely basing on the directives, but mostly on the market-driven considerations. And similarly, when I talk about the branch expansion, as rightly Mr. Srinivas Rao Garu had said, that if you say that the banking system, if it is to be taken care completely by the private sector, so what will be the requirements or the needs or even the wishes of the people who are maintaining inaccessibility to the banking system? But one thing just, so I may be permitted to say here, in the post-nationalization period, the enough branch expansion program. And in fact, at a stage from the 65,000 per branch population by back in the year 1969, we reached the stage where each bank, was in a position to serve the 13,000 population. That was mainly because of almost more than 50% of the total bank branches were located even in the rural areas. So thanks to vigorous drive that were made by the public sector banks. But still, when you talk about the globalization here, the mostly, they wanted to say inflict some kind of economic viability. Say in the name of extending of their social service or the banking services to the community at large, if they run on their branches on uneconomical viability, what is the fun of having that branch at a place? So that's the reason why unless and until a particular branch is really exhibiting and recording increasing volume of business, there is no scope for what you call is attaining the higher level of surpluses. So that's the reason why here the public sector banks actually, no doubt, they focus in the guise under the guise of the reforms. They focused on how to improve the economic efficiency. When you say economic efficiency of a particular bank, ultimately rests on the economic viability of each and every branch of that particular bank. So that's the reason why when there is a direction, coming from the pocket of the central bank and the government of India, naturally the banks have to address the issue of economic viability. That was the reason why maybe there were sometimes in the name of rationalization of the banking activity of the branches which were economically unviable, either they were closed or they were merged with the nearest viable branches, or they were relocated where actually the banking potential is there. but still there was no bank branch. This was the follow-up that was made as a sequence of the economic reforms. And another important thing is, when you say that there is an international access, because once you say that the globalization of the banking system in India has taken place, naturally we have to compete with the global banks. So in order to comply with the global standards, there is a one important provision that what you call is the capital adequacy. Capital adequacy. Earlier, what happened under the guise of the public sector, whether they have the adequate capital or not. So usually very leniently, very sometimes, without any case of hesitation, they used to lend their resources mercilessly and without having any kind of a proper credit appraisal. But the thing now is, when you say that the economic viability of the branch is to be there, naturally one has to look into account of what you call is the matching between the assets and the liability. That what you call is today in the advanced technology of the banking system, what you call is ALM techniques, asset liability management techniques. That means in order to match this, if a particular bank is really interested to extend its increasing size of loans and advances to the needy population, first of all, they must be ensured that they have adequate capital at their front. That's the reason why here the capital adequacy ratios that were actually prescribed by the BIS. So over a period of time, so initially, so we were not supposed to implement the global standards because of inherent limitations on our banking system. So gradually, the Reserve Bank of India has been prescribing the increasing the capital adequacy ratios. And today, of course, we can happily say that all the public sector banks are really complying with whatever the dictums that are made by the Bank for International Settlement in terms of the capital adequacy. Similarly, when you talk about the performance level, so there is a concept called the non-performing assets. When you say the performing, and as long as any particular bank is riddled with the increasing size of NPAs, NPS means the whatever the assets they have, particularly loans and advances, if they are not able to generate, if they are not able to collect the principal amount and the interest during a specific period of time, they are to be considered non-performing assets. If you say that a particular bank it witnesses increasing the size of the NPAs, naturally it will have its own cascading impact on its ability to secure the profits. So that's the reason why here, as per the reforms, provisions are to be created against the quantum and the size of NPAs. So higher the size of NPAs a particular bank has, automatically it has to create a huge quantum of the provisions. And as a result, there will be less scope for increasing the profits. So that's the reason why once, whether it is a public sector bank or the private sector bank, once it is conscious that it has to create an appropriate size of provisions in view of its NPA portfolios, automatically it will take care of the very, very imperative measures through which they can increase their volume of business and they can increase their ultimately the profitability. And that's the reason why even in terms of what you call is with regard to this, the reforms, consolidation. That means instead of having too many types of the banks, by the time the 1991, we used to say the India witnessed the presence of public sector banks in which again the scheduled and nationalized banks and say public sector banks and the private sector banks, the foreign banks, cooperative banks, the regional rural banks, their contention was, say, why do we have all these kinds of the banks? It is nothing but overlapping our scarce resources. So in order to minimize this redundancy with regard to the banking operations, let us focus on, so what you call is a consolidation. This consolidation mostly is we have been witnessing very recently in terms of mergers and acquisitions. So these all things are a gradual manner that the Indian banking system focused on those areas. And in the light of the traversing from the traditional banking to the modern banking, from the predominant public sector bank to, say, to some way, say, inching towards the private sector banking today. So definitely, even the public sector bank mostly, so it has to face a lot of challenges. So after all, it has to have certain kind of a face saving, because when many people used to say that when you compare with the performance of public sector bank, that of the private sector bank, usually one should find always they will be inching in favor of the private sector bank, because in terms of what you call is access to qualitative customer services. So mostly, so that's the reason why there is an urgent need even in the public sector in order to compete with the private sector banks, not only within the four walls of our country, but even the private foreign banks they have to face. So that kind of a competition. So that's the reason why they have to undergo enormous challenges. So unless and until, so whatever the challenges that are being faced by the Indian banking systems are resolved, it is very difficult for the Indian banking system at present. So to resolve its various, say, conflict of interest and conflict of ideas, because after all, so what you see in the democratic setup that is there in India, so naturally you find the divergent opinions, divergent views. So whenever a Reserve Bank of India say announced a particular policy, obviously it is subjected to so many contradictory viewpoints. So that's the reason why I say after all, so the Indian economy provides a platform where an exchange of information either in favor or against, say, with regard to any particular policy. So let me focus on these the challenges now. Here, say, my humble submission to this, say, August, say, body is, so no doubt that there are an umpteen number of challenges that are faced by the Indian banking system in India, not only in India, but in the majority of the emerging developing countries. But say, due to the paucity of time, and in fact, so I'm constrained. I'm mindful of my limitations. With that, say, thinking in my mind that I will focus on only certain areas, I'm sure that which really deserve certain kind of, so the discussion, some kind of, say, focusing on that. Because today what we said was Indian banking has been really traversing from the ancient techniques of the banking to the modern, so the technology, say, based on the banking system. Because otherwise we will not be anywhere, say, in the presence of the globalized developed banking system. That's the reason why each and wherever, say, we find an opportunity, so not only in the financial sector, but even the sectors. So wherever there is an opportunity, Indian economy will always try to rise to the occasion. So the one important guiding principle that the Indian banking system has been striving hard for the last, say 2 decades, particularly in the post-reform period, whether you talk about the role that is being played by the central bank, that's the Reserve Bank of India, or whether you can talk about the policies that are actually ventilated by the Minister of Finance, that is a very another important arm of the financial system of in India. These all things gives the clear signals that we are ultimately inching to. So what you call is the globalization, where the predominance of the privatization and the predominance of, and in that context also, there may be some kind of a dilution with regard to the role or the share of the public sector bank. But here, say, we are aware pretty well that there are certain inherent advantages with regard to the public sector, so none can dispute with it. But as long as the public sector really is able to generate the expected the fruitful dividends to the society, absolutely there will not be any problem. And in fact, the public sector can further be strengthened. But at the same time, if you find that the public sector, because of the social reasons or the political reasons or some other economic reasons, or even some other compulsions in the context of the globalization, if the public sector has to shut down and has to, say, shrink its some kind of a share, and in order to come out of its responsibilities in the financial system, even then we have to say still there must be, say, a dominant voice of the public sector over the private sector. We cannot completely say that the dilution of the public sector in 100%. But as long as we say that the competition must be there between the public sector and the private sector, then only the exact expected results will be coming from this banking system. Then we have to allow both the public and the private sector. And there must be always level playing field. So whenever you compare between the two kinds of the banking systems under the same country, there must be always a policy of, say, exhibiting level playing field treatment. So there will not be differential treatment, say one kind of a treatment to the public sector and the kind of a treatment to the private sector. So that's the reason why here, so when you talk about the strengthening of the public sector, so that, the efforts of the private sector can be, say, supplemented, if not the supplanted. So we cannot find the role of a public sector as substituting with the private sector completely and vice versa. But these two things must go hand in hand. So otherwise, and after all, so right from the 1948, what we say is we are following after all the mixed economic system, where the predominance of the public sector on the one hand, the private sector on the other. The same kind of system we can also say continue in the banking system with certain kind of variance of the degrees of the difference, if not of the kind. So when you dwell on the important challenges, the first thing I wanted to focus on, today, the most of the public sector banks have been facing problems when they enter into the era of financing MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises. Here, there is no second thought about the role, the contribution that are made by the MSMEs at the external level of the economy, whether you talk about in terms of the contribution to the GDP or in terms of export earnings, in terms of generating employment opportunities, in terms of industrial production activities, none can dispute it. So that's the reason why right from the year 2006, a special focus by means of widening the concept of the micro, small, and medium enterprises. So basing on the criteria of the investment, the capital, in fixed capital in plant and machinery, and of course to the turnover, basing on this, say, twin elements, the concept of the public sector was subject to be modified. And today what happened was, when the MSMEs were considered part of the priority sector lendings, naturally the banks have to give much prominent importance to the financing the micro, small, and medium enterprises. But the very important problem, or rather a challenge, is, say, no doubt they are contributing their might, but when they are actually acceding to the banks for the purpose of procuring the sizable credits, then that is a problem that the majority of the times, even the public sector banks, they're hesitating to release some size of advances to the MSMEs, basing on certain misapprehensions. The main apprehension that were created in the minds of the bankers, mostly, particularly the public sector banks, have been, number one, the majority of the times the MSMEs used to involve in the cash transactions. And rather than, today we talk about the technology-based, the digital transactions. So naturally, when the banks were, used to have some kind of a straightforward, that means without any kind of, allowing a scope for any kind of a corrupt practices. So naturally, they always insist on the execution of the latest technologies. But when you look into the orbit of MSMEs, so particularly the micro units, even though you say that in the micro units concept, that's up to the 5 crores of investment. So today we are calling it the micro unit. Still, whatever the techniques of manufacture, the methods in the line of production, and their marketing strategies, they are not actually to the expected level of the market scenario. Because here, the very success or failure of the MSMEs will definitely be relied upon their competitiveness with the so-called the large scale industrial enterprise. Sometimes even they have to compete with the multinational corporations. They have to maintain their edge. They have to be competitive enough. They have to be competitive at the price level. They have to be competitive at the quality level. They have to be competitive even at the delivery terms. But in all these levels, many a time they're lagging behind. So when they are lagging behind, and particularly with their poor marketing designs, what happened was they are not able to really come up with and actually at the expected level. And that's the reason why when the banks find that there are something, say, alarming situation on the face of this MSMEs because of their inherent problems, where they talk about the inefficient management, or sometimes the unviability, sometimes the formation of the sickness in these units. These all things, made the commercial banks, both the public sector and the private sector, alert. So naturally, very rarely, so the maximum they will confine to is, say, to what extent as part of the priority sector advances, the MSMEs can be exceeded to the credit portfolio. So to that extent, they are being. But here, the government intention is the major doses of financial resources in the form of credit deployment must be extended to the MSMEs. Because many a time, even the umpteen number of countries really suggested how to restructure the MSMEs in India and how to make really the modernization of MSMEs in India. Because when you take into account the scope of a medium sector industrial unit, it can have an investment in terms of the plant and machinery up to the 250 crores. So definitely there is a scope for the modernization. There is a scope for, say, some kind of the technological upgradation. So if that is to be taken place, naturally, the requirement of bulk finance that should be extended by the banks. So in this context, naturally, the banks have to revisit, say, to the MSMEs financial requirements, and particularly, so for this, both the government and the Reserve Bank of India, so have to do certain things, because here, after all, in the Indian financial system has not been completely ruled by either by the Ministry of Finance or by the government of India. There is always a nexus between these two. So the dual control. Sometimes, this dual controls, so we may consider it as a positive impact. Sometimes, while it is considered as a negative, that's a different matter. But these two, the Reserve Bank of India and the Ministry of Finance, the government of India, so have to, and there is a separate department, there is a separate ministry for MSMEs. They have to take care of the increasing the viability, and so that, the bankers will be assured of that even though they extended the bulk finance to the MSMEs for the variety of diversified purposes, definitely the MSMEs, so there is a possibility, say, will come out. And they will be, say, definitely the inferior to the large scale enterprises. But the only thing is some kind of the thinking in the minds of the bankers, whether it is the public sector or the private sector, both are sailing in the same, and particularly in the private sector. So definitely, you say that the profit consciousness, and always they find the ventures wherever they find the banking potentialities will be there. But the public sector, there is a one stigma that is there, it's the social responsibility to the society. They cannot completely, say, continue their policies purely basing on the profit considerations. But at one point of time, say, in order to maintain their expressing concerns and extending their important contribution to the society, they have to build up adequate financial resources, and thereby, so they will be allowed to extend huge resources, financial resources to the MSMEs. This is number one. And the number two is, I told you that the capital adequacy. So here, the adequate capital must be, say, maintained by each and every bank, because there is a specified stipulation as part of the Basel norms, a very popular, right from the year 2008. In fact, India started implementing the Basel norms. That the Basel norms are actually, nothing but the norms that are developed and established by the Bank for International Settlement. So to make the international banking much more viable, competent enough, and sometimes basing on that, the health of the banking system throughout the globe must be strengthened. So in order to be competitive enough in the context of the global banking system, the Indian banking systems must also to comply with, because there is a dictum. So whenever we say that we have to align with the international banks, after all, we have to comply with the global best banking standards, whatever the standards that are established, that are prescribed, that are specified by the international regulating agencies. So that's the reason why here the capital adequacy norms are to be specified. But here, when you talk about the provision of adequate capital on the balance sheet of a bank, particularly the public sector bank, whenever you find that the adequate capital is not there, say just now, so I'd say that prior to the reform period, that the majority of the banks, it was rather unfortunate that they, even for the sake of extending their loans and advances, they have, say, eaten away their equity base. So sometimes, with irrespective of the fact whether they're really having the equity base under the resources, so they used to say show some kind of a very, very casual way in extending the loans and advances. That was the reason why that the recycling of the banking funds were not taking place in an adequate and a satisfactory manner. That is the basis where today we have been seeing that the rising of the level of the NPAs. So in order to arrest that trend, there must be some kind of a positive culture that should be, say, established in all the banks, particularly the public sector banks. But when you say that sufficient capital is not there at the, say, instance of the public sector bank, again, it is the responsibility of the central government, being the major shareholder. So it is to infuse the capital. But when you say that the banking, say the organizations are to receive capital from the government of India, after all, the government of India has to allocate the budgetary resource. So as part of the budget, the government of India has to allocate this additional capital to be pumped into the banking system. What for? First of all, to maintain a compliance norm with regard to international banking standards. So in that process, what happened was, when the additional capital, say from the government of India, say is coming to the banking system, naturally, it leads to some kind of what you call is a fiscal uncertainties. It will have a drag. It will have the additional constraint on the government financial system. And another important melody, say here the challenge, why we used to consider challenge is the distribution of the adequate capital among the different banks is not always based on some kind of a systematic procedures and not basing always on some kind of a scientific validities, but rather so bias or in a casual manner. And most of the times, here some kind of lobbying techniques. Say if the CMD of a particular bank happens to be, say, maintaining, say, close lobbying with the bureaucrats with regard to the Ministry of Finance, automatically he used to get the major share of that particular additional capital infusion. And there is no basis for the distribution of the capital that is to be infused by the central government among the different public sector banks. But the thumb rule is the weak banks must be provided. If that is the case, what will be the incentive for the banks which are really exhibiting their results in the most satisfactory manner? This is again, say some kind of a challenge. When you talk about the banking system, so no doubt each and every public sector bank has to comply with the international banking standards. As part of it, it has to maintain adequate capital stock. There is no doubt about it. But in that, say if you say that today there is a feeling that in order to infuse the capital to each and every public sector bank, there will be at least, say, 2 trillions of say rupees actually that is required. But what the majority of the bankers or the economists consider it is, instead of releasing that amount, say in the various phases, they have to take into account the very, very important the requirement, the basic need. That means which bank really requires, basing on its successful maintenance of certain performance ratios, whether you talk about what we call is say financial ratios. Basing on that, if you really the central government allows the utilization of the additional capital infusion by the banks basing on some justified criteria, it really go a long way. And so that, the other banks which are not really maintaining certain kind of a prudent regulations, then they will come out and they will try to explore, and at least they will make an attempt. Or otherwise, just like that, as a matter of casual things, if these funds are distributed by the central government, say among the different banks, it will show some signs or the weaknesses, or sometimes, so what you call as indifference. And the dominance of the part of the bureaucratic style of functioning of the central government mechanism. That's the reason why the many people, and even from the practical bankers, the bankers will say occupied the coveted positions. They also made the expressions at the different platforms that the capital adequacy, the infusion of the capital by the central bank, so no doubt as part of the budgetary allocations, but it should be based on some valid criteria. So that's an important thing. Then after that, there is today everybody is talking about the financial inclusion. So the very outset, so Sri Ramaragaru and Srinivas Garu rightly pointed out that whatever the Indian banking system that is in existing today, it must be in a position to take care of, whether you talk about, say, under the guise of globalization or the privatization, or even the dilution of the public sector bank. So that doesn't matter. But ultimately, the banking system that is existing in India must take care of the divergent requirements of the people. Say, hitherto were actually, they were neglected, they were denied an opportunity to have access to the banking products. So that's the reason why here, so throughout the world, not only in India, the concept of financial inclusion surfaced in the global financial system. And in fact, just if I am right, way back in the year 2000, in the General Assembly of UNO, there was a resolution passed that each and every country must design a gradual achievement of the targets under the guise of Millennium Development Goals. And subsequently, the nomenclature was changed into the Sustainable Development Goals. And as a part of it, the inclusive growth was levied much emphasis. And in fact, so the planners in our country also, when they drafted the 10th, the 11th and the 12th five-year plan, the major focus on the inclusive growth. And when you say the inclusive growth, in which one important part is inclusive finance. So that's the reason why today, and in fact, after the 12th five-year plan, the banks have to cater to the maximum level the requirements of the financial inclusion targets. So that's the reason why here there is a big challenge. On the one hand, the banks are actually instructed to maintain their economic viability and to strengthen the balance sheet. And at the same time, they have to comply with the best international banking standards. On the other hand, so equally, this is also an important, they have to address to the very apt requirements of the Indian society, particularly from the viewpoint of the banking context, that is the people who were denied earlier, the people who were not having an access to the banking system, either in terms of keeping their surplus funds in the form of the deposit with the banking system, or in terms of making avail of the different kind of products of the banking system. So for all these, who are the people who were denied earlier, now they must be given an opportunity. They must be provided enough space in the banking system so that, they can enjoy, they can first of all maintain an access to the banking institutions, and having exposure to financial literacy, so they will be definitely knowing what kind of the bankable products that are available. And at the same time, the availability of this banking products at affordable prices with utmost customer care. So these all the things are actually the Indian government say hinted to the banks as part of financial inclusion initiatives. So as part of this, of course, the financial literacy programs were say enhanced, and even the one important program like the Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana program, and for that no frills accounts. And even under this, the role of business correspondents and the business facilitators in the remote areas in the absence of the banking network. So really, say these initiatives and the measures really say worked very well. Still, there is a big gap in the sense with regard to the reaching the remote areas. There was always a gap between the public sector banks and the private sector. So under the guise of the consolidation, under the guise of say the mergers or the rationalizing of the banking system, the public sector bank what actually did was say thanks to the recent the mergers of the almost the 10 banks into the 4 different banks. So they, in the name of the rationalization, they merged the branches, and sometimes they closed down the shutters in the rural area with an intention that the rural areas will be having an access by means of technological applications. So maybe by means of extending the role of this business correspondents and the business facilitators, definitely we are sure that the people living in the remote parts of the country, they can maintain an access to the diversified bankable products at affordable prices. But still what happened was there is always some kind of apprehension in the minds of the bankers, particularly in the public sector, whenever they wanted to say extend their services, whether it's the deposit services or even the other financial services. Naturally, they are always in the say impression that the recovery rate will be very, very in a modest basis or even a very, very less. So that's the reason why most of the times they used to bypass, they used to say avoid in participating at this. But because of certain kind of dictums from the Reserve Bank of India and the Ministry of Finance, so they have to say earmark certain size, but not with the much more fanfare and enthusiasm. So that's the reason why here, so there is always some kind of impression in the minds of these stakeholders with regard to the financial inclusion, say institutional builders. So there, unless and until, first of all, right from the top, that's the Reserve Bank of India. It's not just simply releasing the measures or the initiatives that are to be followed by the bankers, but they have to follow very, very vigorously the way they are being executed, the way they are actually practiced, the way they are really implemented in true letter and spirit. That's very, very important. Just basing on, say, some primary or peripheral statistical figures, they cannot actually conclude. So whether the system is going very good or the system is beset with certain kind of limitations. So that's the reason why here, so apart from these two things, one is the Ministry of Finance and the Reserve Bank of India, so must impose certain kind of, say, modalities. And these modalities must be the part of the audit mechanism, because every bank is subjected to the review and audit. So at the time of audit, so what actually the real picture? If there are any gaps, so how to say overcome that gaps? These things must be suggested by the audit. And in the next audit comes to what extent these suggestions have really been implemented by the banking system, so a particular branch. So these are things, say, must be taking place. Then after that, there is one more, say, the challenge the Indian banking system so fraught with the conflict of roles between the Reserve Bank of India and the Government of India. There is always the conflict of interest. So the Reserve Bank of India as a owner and as a regulator, and the Government of India as a owner. So naturally under the dual control. So sometimes, what happened, the bank, so or will be in a state of confusion when they receive the circulars or the instructions from these two important agencies. Sometimes, they appear to be in conflict. So whether they have to implement the dictates given by the Reserve Bank of India or to be executed by the policies framed by the Minister of Finance. So even though the Reserve Bank of India in its charter, it is mentioned that the Reserve Bank of India, that the central bank is to maintain some kind of an autonomous status, still there are apprehensions for the simple reason, and after all, the governor of the Reserve Bank of India says to be nominated by again the executive. So that is again by the government. So naturally there will be certain kind of a compulsions. And sometimes what happened was here the Reserve Bank of India, the heads of the Reserve Bank of India, so have to read the mindset of the people at the helm of affairs of the central government. And accordingly, say at the time they devise the different kind of strategies. And of course, say when you look into the earlier, say, the policy of the monetary policy, earlier it was the prerogative, it is the complete domain of the Reserve Bank of India. But of late, when there was some kind of, say, controversial exchange, the contradictory exchanges between the finance ministry concerned and governor of Reserve Bank of India or the management of the Reserve Bank of India on certain issues, naturally the government wanted to tighten its control over the administrative structure of RBI, particularly the monetary policy. Because why the monetary policy assumes that much of importance? Even if you peep into the inherent objectives of the monetary policy, most of the times this monetary policy has to strike a balance between the one thing is the inflation targeting and the other one is the economic growth acceleration. The government of India always is conscious to promote economic growth, sometimes even at the cost of increasing inflation. But the central bank always it's a conscious. So in the process of the containing inflation, so always it applies the hard, say the monetary instruments. So you talk about the reserve rates, like the repo or the reverse repo or the bank rate, or sometimes the CRR or the SLR. So these are all things to very meticulously employed by the central bank for the purpose of containing the inflation. They have to go with the prevailing the economic situation, either in terms of inflation or in terms of economic depression. But the government of India are always, because as you see, it is headed by a political party naturally, in order to gain some kind of a political mileage, which again to be linked with the economic front, because we cannot separate the political objectives from that of the economic objectives. These two things go together. We cannot separate it. We cannot isolate it. So in that pretext, there was certain kind of a, say, rupture that was taking place. So that's the reason why maybe that might be, so the reason prompted the government of India to constitute a separate committee under the name of what you call is, say, autonomy. So the monetary policy committee, the committee on monetary policy, in which there usually be the 6 members will be there, equally shared by the Reserve Bank of India and the Minister of Finance. So earlier it was the prerogative of the Reserve Bank of India. Now it has to share that platform with the officials or the concerned people of the Minister of Finance. So whatever the decision that was taken basing on the majority, anyway, the 50%, 50%. So in this way, the critics of the banking system, so actually they used to say that the central bank must be allowed to act independently. So if they really, their priorities are for protecting the interest of the economy at large. And even from the political circles also, so many a time, even from the voice of the Prime Minister, they used to say that we wanted to give the utmost and 100% autonomy to the central bank. But when really the situation demands, if the national interest warrants, so we cannot rule out the intervention of the government into the orbit of the monetary policy. So that's still it is a debatable point. So just with one sentence we cannot say, but it is a growing challenge. That is to the administrator sitting prettily at the top of this central bank, and the people with the Ministry of Finance. Then there is another growing the challenge today that Indian banking system has been facing is the rise in non-performing assets. Rise in non-performing assets. It's not confined only to the public sector banks, but even in private sector banks also you find certain kind of increases in the NPAs. So at the very beginning we said that as long as that there is a say control and having the manageable quantum of the NPAs, then the performance of that banking institution will be excellent. So that, they will be able to extend their resources to the divergent sections of the population. And further, they can strengthen even in the context of intensive competitive global banking system. But what actually the problems that are really say plaguing the banking system in the form of rise in NPAs. And if you look into the picture of NPAs, earlier what happened was the quality of assets, the assessment of the quality of the assets was not that. In the absence of international best standards, so a casual approach and even the classification of the loans and advances on the different category was not based on acceptable international banking standards. But today, as a consequent to the Basel norms, say all the assets in the sense here, the loans and advances are to be categorized in terms of quality, in the form of standard, substandard, bad and doubtful, and the loss incurring assets. So here, the very important problem is identification and the recognition of a bad debt. And many a time what happened was the bankers, even at the top, so after all, their tenure is confined to the 2 to 3 years. Naturally, at the fag end of their tenure, they always wanted to paint a rosy picture over their banking institution. So they always hesitant. So to identify the bad debts, they identify the loans and advances which are really maintaining the low level of quality. So as a result, what happened when it is not identified, sometimes they wanted to postpone that recognition of the bad asset. The inherent system, that means the banking system is exposed to lots of vulnerabilities. So naturally what happened then? So when it is the NPS were not adequately recognized, adequately measured, it's a cascading impact definitely will be high on the overall banking system. So that's the reason why here, so there are different kind of the procedures that are established by the Reserve Bank of India as part of the Basel norms. So today what happened was, particularly after the COVID-19 scenario, so there was an increase with regard to the NPA level, particularly in the year 2021. So to the rate of the gross NPAs, if you take into account the 8.2% with regard to the public sector and even the private sector also. So they are also having an increase, but not with the same kind of magnitude. Maybe there will be a difference of 2 to 3% of, so with regard to the rise in NPAs. And what actually the mechanism to address this high rise of NPAs that is already there in the banking system. So as part of reforms, the Reserve Bank of India, of course, at the instance of the Ministry of Finance, so gave a signal to creation of the debt recovery tribunals and one-time settlements. And there was a legislation like the SARFAESI Act. So whatever the loans and advances that are identified as NPAs, after a certain period of time, the banks used to take the possession of those assets which are actually collated, and those assets were put into the auction. And the sale proceeds of those assets will be credited to the respective banks. So to some extent, but actually these things, say, for certain period went on well. But after that, what happened? So there were, as I said, the intervention of the political affairs into the banking system. There were certain kinds of, as I said, that at the corporate level, the frauds that were taking place. So not always, when you say that there is an increasing rise of the NPS in a particular bank, that doesn't mean so we cannot completely fix the responsibility on the banking system itself. After all, the functioning of the banking system has to be there in the context of the social environment, the political environment, and the economic environment. There will be certain kind of social systems, political systems, and economic systems, which made the banking systems to act either in the positive direction or to run in the negative direction. So here what happened was, so really say there was some intervention. So umpteen number of committees, not in the banking system. So whenever you say that the banking systems were collapsed, majority of the committees say observation was too much of interference into the banking system by the political stigma. So that was the reason, particularly in the cooperative banking system or even the rural banking system, that was say pertinently mentioned. So here, when you talk about the frauds that have become a major challenge to the Indian banking system, as earlier, say Mr. Ramaraga rightly said, when the corporates were allowed to say move out of country by actually disrespecting the banking system by means of exploiting the systemic weaknesses in the banking system, either by means of having their close tie-ups with bureaucracy, or sometimes what happened is they happen to be say occupants in the legislature. So naturally they have a certain kind of a connectivity. Because of that positive advantages, they used to say exploit the inherent systemic say weaknesses in the banking system. And as a result, sometimes even the Reserve Bank of India was not able to do anything. As it's rightly mentioned, in the case of the corporate, say the frauds on the defaulters, and so it's actually tantamount to so trillions of say rupees. And actually, say as per the latest estimate, that's almost say 2.3 the trillions. So actually, the bankman money say captain, what you call is that default. If that is the case, why the banks are really particular when even a small farmer or even a small businessman say owes certain kind of, even sometimes runs in not more than say 1 lakh rupee. Actually, they used to take care of and use lots of harsh methods to secure their loan back in terms of both principal and interest. So this is again say $1,000 million question. The inherent say deficiencies or the systemic failures, or sometimes the lenient attitude of the people at the top towards this. So it might be the reasons, but actually, as long as we make the banking system say foolproof, corrupt free, for this the technological upgradations must be employed in a right track. Definitely, there is a possibility to reduce that kind of unwanted situations. But still, one thing we can say is, so the mindset of the stakeholders of the entire banking system, whether it is the people or shareholders, the depositors, or the beneficiaries of the corporates, or even the stakeholders in the government, or the stakeholders even the administrative setup, unless say they keep their mindset in a way that whatever the things that actually they are rolling say down to the banks at the grassroots level with amplified the measurable positive measures, then definitely we can say there is some extent we can restrict. but it's ultimately the mindset of the people, mindset of the society must be changed. That's a very, very important. If one take the advance from a bank, say if you say that, okay, no problem, say, so at one some time or other, definitely the government will announce the loan waiver. If that is the intention of a particular beneficiary or the people who actually receive the loan, they are becoming more or less the willful defaulters. But the banks actually wanted to prevent that kind of a willful default. In that context, so the mechanism, not only at the bankers, and one thing we have been seeing is of late, particularly in the public sector bank, there is always an element of a fear consciousness in the minds of the management personnel of the banking system, particularly at the middle and the top level. Because the fear, that means whenever any kind of, what you call is particularly in the public sector, there are certain kind of vigilant agencies. So you can make a mention about that the CBI or even CVC, the Central Vigilance Commission, or even the CAG, Control and Auditor General. So these are all the things which actually say pinpoint the limitations, and sometimes, so we cannot say always the fraudulent initiatives, but sometimes, the things that are actually not supposed to be taking place because of certain compulsions. Not always we can say they are at their own intentions. They are really doing at their deliberate efforts. But whatever may be the reason, if they really say one banker say is making an attempt to exploit the system for the benefit of a corporate, which really makes the banks in say the loss incurring situation and the weakening the financial status of the bank, then definitely so there should be some kind of a charge sheet. But what actually today is, there is a constant feeling in the minds of the bank people that as long as they don't lend, there will not be any kind of a charge sheets against them. But any point of time, whatever the loan that is, if the extended turned out to be bad, then there will be charge sheets, and there will be empty number of cases in which you are finding that they're keeping those such kind of the top bank officials say issue. So what you call is a prisons where they have to, and they have to say have the empty number of sleepless nights, and they are to be kept in the prisons where they have to rub their shoulders with the criminals. So just because one banker does, we cannot say make it universal that all bankers are to be painted with the same brush. So this kind of a fear must be say removed from the banking management, particularly the Reserve Bank of India has to take initiative, and it should be amply supported by the government of India itself. So actually, when we are say, as you really mentioned, that when you look into whether it is the case of Vijay Malavia, where that the fraud is in the form of a third person, so the outsider is making the banking system so act negative, right? And when you talk about the more Modi, say it's the inherent weakness system. Say once just an accountant who actually say made use of that banking system in his advantage. In these two cases, what we can say is the frauds. But one thing is, the first one, if you take into account, it is because of the political stigma and because of his own say nexus, his own say contacts, or his own familiarity with the people at the governance at the political setup. So is able to say extract the maximum, and even sometimes maybe say it is only the felt in many circles that so the banking system at the times were under certain compulsions. As a result, they extended so what kind of an advantage to the Vijay Malavia. That's Kingfisher Islands. And with regard to this, the Modi case, and actually that was the matter which really say showcasing of the inherent weaknesses, because a man with an accountant, not even a say what you call is a top level manager. So actually is an accountant who is stationed for 6 or 7 years. He used to maintain his own emails. He used to maintain his own, and he used to maintain So in a privacy, and all these things were not noticed by the bank itself or even his own colleagues. There is some kind of a lenient attitude towards this. And this ultimately went in favor of that. And this is then actually what you call is the inherent systemic values. So that's the reason why today, so in the most of the cases, so the banking systems across the globe, so they used to give utmost importance to the risk management techniques, the risks, because when you wanted to improve the tone of the administrative efficiency and thereby the financial viability of the banking system, first of all, the people actually managing the banking system must have an appropriate risk management technique. When you talk about the risks, so of course today we say that it's a credit risk, it's a market risk, in which again, in terms of the what you call is the liquidity risk or the currency risk, because today the banks are exposed to all kinds of the divergent operations. In the good olden days, prior to the reform period, the banking institutions are confined only to the deposits and advances. For that purpose, they used to look at branches. That's all, the primary business. But the ancillary business transactions, even though they were taking place, a very, very insignificant manner. But today what happened, thanks to the globalization, thanks to the techno-savvy products that are there, the banks have to participate in the modernized, developed capital markets, not only in the capital markets, even in the forex markets. So as an authorized dealer, they have to deal in foreign currencies. So naturally, they have to take into account the risk whenever they deal in the foreign currencies. As of today, the foreign exchange rates are vulnerable. The exchange rates of our own country currency in terms of the recognized currencies at the global level are vulnerable because of the so many external, the environmental factors. Still, the banks, when they are involving themselves into the forex business, they have to take care of the currency risks. At that time, that's the reason why what the majority of even the bankers who actually occupied the governor post of the Reserve Bank of India, at one platform or the other, they have openly admitted that so far as the Indian banking system is concerned, in order to execute appropriate risk management techniques, the system suffers from absence of required talent, because if you take care of the risk management techniques, whether it's the market risk or the credit risk or the currency risk, sometimes even the operational risk, one must be equipped with the talent, the expertise with regard to identification of risk, notifying the risk, and even the what you call is organizing the risk mitigation practices. So these all things are really require some kind of a professionalism with regard to the banking sector. But I'm afraid, say if you take into account the personnel that are really manning the banking systems across the Indian banking system, whether it is the public sector or the private sector, so rarely we find such kind of people who are equipped with the huge talents. Maybe say in course of time, because so when you say that the talent that is required, particularly the training institutes, like even the institutes like the National Institute of Bank Management, or even the College for Agricultural Banking, or even the RBA Staff College. So whenever they organize different kind of orientation programs or the training programs for the managerial cadres, for the professional people, so there, they have to ensure that the participant in such kind of a programs, particularly for the manager cadres, are exposed to the right kind of a techniques with regard to the risk management. Because today the risk management has been given much prominence, not only in the Indian banking system, but even the advanced banking systems elsewhere in US or in even Europe. So unless and until we are able to say take care of the appropriate the risk management techniques, it's very, very difficult to contain. But as in the words of the former governor of the RBA, the Raghuram Rajan, actually say unless we maintain a buffer stocking of what you call is the experts with regard to the risk management techniques, So who are actually designing the risk management, say mitigation techniques and the risk management, so the exposures, which really requires, because for example, if you take the project and infrastructure finance, so there are very some stressed sector in the Indian banking system. Say these sectors are really prone to increasing the level of NPAs. You talk about the power sector, you talk about the steel sector, you talk about the energy sectors, and you talk about the project and infrastructure sectors, where you find that the scope for the vulnerability, because there are lots of what you call is the risk exposures will be there. So naturally, in order to mitigate these risks, because the crores and millions of rupees are actually involved in this kind of huge gigantic projects, if really they wanted to say carry on these projects successfully, the efficient professional manager cadre who can take care of the identification of the risk, reporting the risks, and even the organizing the risk management techniques, following the administration of the risk management techniques. If they are there, definitely we can ensure that in course of time, at least, there will be lesser scope for what you call is deficiencies or even the inefficiency of these kinds of the projects. So will be there. So that's the reason why here, when you particularly say today, what happened is, in order to take care of this kind of risk, there is one kind of legislation that was taking place in the year 2016 and 17, IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. The government of India created Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of, say, India, that was created. As part of it, so whatever the actually the defaulters, so when the banks are not able to get, say, their money back, so for one reason or other, if they failed in their efforts, they can be referred to, say, IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. And in fact, so it's only the 6-year board, but still the success rate is the 1/3, 33%. And say the notable, say, examples one can quote under the success rate of this insolvency bankruptcy code is, the one thing is that Bhushan Steels, which was actually, say, taken care by the Tata, and even there is the SR Steels that was taken by the Metal Steels. So in both cases, the success rate is 80%. So 80% of the amount was recovered. But overall, if you take into account, there are about 340 cases that were resolved. Overall, the success rate is hardly 30%. The main reason is, when you say that the insolvency and the bankruptcy code, there is a specific role of the professional people. So particularly the people who are exposed to the law, people who are exposed to the engineering techniques,
Sorry to
people
interrupt,
who are
sir.
exposed to the technology. So all these things actually have to be taken into account.
Yeah. Can you
So,
close in 1 minute, 2 minutes, sir?
okay, please. Right.
Yeah.
So in this infrastructure, so when you say that majority of the times, there will be, say, two kinds of the problems because of increasing the size of this deficiencies in the infrastructure projects, mainly on account of what you call is, say, cost overruns or the schedule overruns. If an infrastructure project like the national highway, or even the project relating to the construction of a port, or even a power project, or even the metro rail project, in which cases there will be sometimes the schedule period is 10 years, but sometimes it will take the decades together. So the delay in projects, so for the purpose of maintenance or the, say, conducting of that project, they wanted to, say, acquire land. So even in the process of acquiring land, there will be the delays. So when there is a delay, naturally it will lead to delay in the execution of the project. And similarly, when you talk about the cost escalation, so when the project is delayed, naturally with regard to the prices of input factors, price of labor, price of raw material, sometimes the scarce commodities like steel. So naturally push up the prices. So as a result, there will be escalation in the project cost. So that's the reason why in this infrastructure projects, if there is a consortium banks, whether the public sector, sometimes the private sector. So naturally, when there is a delay, after all, this negative impact will be felt on the banking system. That's the reason why, say, people used to say that in order to avoid that kind of unwanted situation, the role and the existence of a professional assessor. At the time they prepared what you call is DPR, detailed project report, where they have to be clearly specified, what is the time schedule, and the time schedule must be made real, what you call is a reasonable period, not just the fancy, say we can complete within 2 years or 3 years, but actually rarely it is not possible. So whatever the period they mentioned, that should be the reasonable. And even with regard to the cash flows, that should be reasonable. These all things, must be inserted in a right perspective in the document called the DPR, so detailed project report. But the preparation of the detailed project report really warrants some kind of an expertise and the skill. So that kind of a people are really lacking. So they are not in an abundant manner. So that's the reason why here again, the banking system, or for that matter, the RBI or the government of India, have to take as adequate any sufficient measures to take care of. So this kind of what you call is procuring or the having right type of people with the required talent, with required expertise. So with this, so I wanted to wind up my session.
Thank you.
So one thing what I want to say is, so it is, so I never consider it's just like it's in a lecture, but it is the revisiting the subject which I almost, so I have a fancy throughout the PG career and the academic career at the university, that is the banking subject. So it's a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much
for giving me, say, to revisit and update myself. So on this subject, so there are other important items, but so as I said, whatever say, I said just this is a drop in the ocean, and really I look forward. So with the participants, so whatever the clarification that are really required,
sure.
I try in a modest way, say to my best of my knowledge. So I will try to give the class.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for giving me this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sumaruga Professor Hrishikesh Rao garu Bharatadesha banking రంగంలో సవాళ్లు అనేటువంటి అంశం పైన సుమారుగా గంట 15-20 నిమిషాల సమయం పాటు వారు పూర్తిగా సుదీర్ఘమైనటువంటి వారి యొక్క ఉపన్యాసంలో బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగం భారతదేశం ఎదుర్కొన్నటువంటి సవాళ్ళు అనేటువంటి విషయం మీద చాలా స్పష్టంగా లోతైనటువంటి అధ్యయనం చేయడం జరిగింది. ప్రధానంగా వారు ఈ దేశంలో 1969 సంవత్సరం లోపల నాటి ప్రధాని శ్రీమతి ఇందిరాగాంధీ గారు బ్యాంకులను జాతీయం చేయడం దగ్గర నుండి మొదలుకుంటే నేటి బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగంలో వస్తున్నటువంటి అనేకమైనటువంటి మార్పులు సవాళ్ళ గురించి వారు ప్రధానంగా చెప్పుకుంటూనే ఈ దేశంలోని బ్యాంకులు, కుటీర పరిశ్రమలు, వ్యవసాయ రంగానికి సంబంధించిందే కాకుండా ఈ దేశంలో అనేక రకాలైనటువంటి బ్యాంకులు పనిచేసి ఉన్నాయి. నేషనల్ బ్యాంక్స్ గాను, ఇంటర్నేషనల్ బ్యాంక్స్ గాను, కోఆపరేటివ్ బ్యాంక్స్ గాను, రూరల్ బ్యాంక్స్ గాను, కమర్షియల్ బ్యాంక్స్ గాను, అగ్రికల్చర్ బ్యాంక్స్ గాను, వివిధ రకాల బ్యాంకులన్నీ కూడా దేశంలో ఉండేటువంటి సామాన్య మధ్యతరగతి అన్ని రకాల ప్రజలకు ఈ యొక్క రుణ సదుపాయం కల్పిస్తూ వారి యొక్క ఆర్థిక అభివృద్ధి కోసం ఈ బ్యాంకులన్నీ కూడా పాటుపడ్డాయని చెప్పేసి తెలియజేసుకుంటూనే ఇక అందులోపల పబ్లిక్ సెక్టర్ అండ్ ప్రైవేట్ సెక్టర్ గా ఈ మధ్య కాలంలో అనేకమైనటువంటి బ్యాంకింగ్లు అనేటువంటి రావడం జరిగింది. ముఖ్యంగా ఎంఎస్ఎంఈ, మైక్రో స్మాల్ మీడియం ఎంటర్ప్రైజెస్ సంబంధించినటువంటి విషయాలను వారు ప్రధానంగా చెప్పుకుంటూనే దీంట్లో సవాళ్లుగా వారు చెప్పుకుంటూనే ప్రధానంగా క్యాపిటల్ అడిక్వెన్సీ అనేటువంటిది ప్రధానంగా చెప్పుకుంటూనే రేషనలైజేషన్ అండ్ కంట్రోల్ ఆఫ్ రోల్, కాన్ఫ్లిక్ట్ ఆఫ్ రోల్ ఆర్బీఐ అండ్ బిట్వీన్ గవర్నమెంట్ ఆఫ్ ఇండియాకి సంబంధించినటువంటి వాళ్ళ లోపల ఉండేటువంటి ఆర్బీఐకి కానీ గవర్నమెంట్ ఆఫ్ ఇండియాకు మధ్య ఉండేటువంటి ఒక కాన్ఫ్లిక్ట్ కు సంబంధించినటువంటి విషయాన్ని కూడా అదొక ప్రధాన సవాలుగా చెప్పుకుంటూనే ప్రధానంగా ఇంకో ప్రధానమైనటువంటి విషయం ఎన్పిఏస్ అంటే నాన్ పర్ఫార్మింగ్ అసెట్స్ అనేటువంటిది ఇవాళ భారత బ్యాంకింగ్ రంగంలో ఒక పెద్ద విషయంగా వారు పరిగణిస్తూ ఇది ఒక పెద్ద సవాలు బ్యాంకింగ్లకు అనేటువంటి విషయాన్ని ప్రధానంగా తెలియజెప్పుకునే వారు విజయ్ మాల్యాకు, నీరవ్ మోడీకి, లలిత్ మోడీకి సంబంధించినటువంటి విషయాలు కూడా చాలా స్పష్టంగా తెలియజేశారు. వారికి మా తెలంగాణ జనవేదిక తరఫున ప్రత్యేకమైనటువంటి ధన్యవాదాలు సార్. మీకు మా తెలంగాణ జనవేదిక తరఫున మరొక్కసారి మా ప్రత్యేకమైనటువంటి ధన్యవాదాలు తెలియజేసుకుంటూ ఈ అంశం మీద ఎవరైనా మిత్రులు ప్రశ్నలు కానీ ఏమైనా అడగదలుచుకుంటే సార్ను అడగవలసిందిగా నేను కోరుకుంటున్నాను. ప్లీజ్ ఎవరైనా ప్రశ్నలు కానీ ఏమైనా అడిగేదలుచుకుంటే
Please raise your hand so that I can unmute you. Please. Yeah. Professor Subramanian garu. Yeah, please, sir. Please unmute yourself, sir.
నమస్కారం అండి రిషి.
నమస్తే రస్మయ్య.
చాలా ఎక్స్టెన్సివ్ గా చెప్పావు. కంగ్రాచులేషన్స్ ఆఫ్టర్
థ్యాంక్ యూ వెరీ మచ్.
పీరియడ్ ఆఫ్ 30 years రిటైర్మెంట్. తర్వాత అసలు సిస్టమ్ అనే ఫాల్ట్ ఉంది రిషి. రఘురామరాజన్ ఏమని చెప్పాడంటే ఇండియాలో ఉంది రిస్క్లెస్ క్యాపిటలిజం. రిస్క్లెస్ క్యాపిటలిజం అంటే వాడు బ్యాంకుల దగ్గర లోన్ తీసుకొని బిజినెస్ స్టార్ట్ చేస్తానంటారు. రియల్ ఎస్టేట్ వెంచర్ ఉందనుకో వాడి దగ్గర డబ్బులు ఉండవు. బ్యాంక్ దగ్గర కొద్దిగా లోన్ తీసుకుంటాడు, ఫౌండేషన్ వేసి కస్టమర్స్ డబ్బులు కట్టమంటాడు. వాడు వేసి ఫెయిల్ అయిపోయినా కూడా కస్టమర్స్ వెళ్ళిపోతారు. అదేదో దివాన్ ఫైనాన్స్ కంపెనీ అన్ని కూడా ఇలా రియల్ ఎస్టేట్ కంపెనీలు అన్ని అవుతాయి. ఆ రిస్క్ క్యాపిటలిజం ఆయన ఏమిటంటాడంటే లాభం వస్తే వాడిది, నష్టం వస్తే బ్యాంకుది. అది సైకాలజీ ఇండియాలో. మేజర్ ఫాల్ట్ ఈ నాన్ పెర్ఫార్మింగ్ అసెట్స్ కి ఎక్కడ స్టార్ట్ అవుతున్నాయి అంటే ఈ ప్రాజెక్ట్ ఫైనాన్స్ స్టడీ చేసేటప్పుడు అసెట్ క్వాలిటీని కొలేటరల్ అసెట్ క్వాలిటీని కరెక్ట్ గా జడ్జ్ చేయటం. అఫ్ కోర్స్ దేర్ మే బి కరెక్ట్ ప్రాక్టీసెస్ ఆర్ పొలిటికల్ ఇంటర్ఫరెన్స్. లో వాల్యూ అసెట్స్ ని కొలేటరల్ గా పెట్టి లాస్ అయిపోయినప్పుడు డిఫాల్ట్ అయిపోతే అది బజార్లో అమ్ముకుందామంటే అమ్ముకుంటాం. అలా పడిపోతుంది. ఈ మధ్య రీస్ట్రక్చర్ కంపెనీస్ అన్నారు బ్యాంకులు, అవి కూడా వాళ్ళతో కొల్లాడి అయింది. తక్కువ రేటు కోట్ చేసి బ్యాంకులు లాస్. అన్ని సిస్టమ్ అంతా ఒక విధమైన పొల్యూషన్. అందుకనే ఇదివరకు ఎవరో చెప్పారనమాట, దర్ ఈస్ ఎ నెక్సస్ బిట్వీన్ పొలిటీషియన్, బ్యూరోక్రసీ అండ్ బిజినెస్ మ్యాన్. అది బ్రేక్ అవ్వాల. రిఫార్మ్స్ పెట్టిన తర్వాత బ్రేక్ చేస్తామన్నారు, అవలా.
అంటే ఇట్స్ వెరీ డిఫికల్ట్. So to break it very difficult. ఎందుకంటే so we cannot separate political from economic.
ఈ శశికాంత్ దాస్ ఆర్బీఐ గవర్నర్ ఈజ్ నాట్ ఎకనామిస్ట్, ఏ బ్యూరోక్రాట్ ఇన్ ది సెంట్రల్ గవర్నమెంట్. ఆయన నుంచి ఒక టెరం పెట్టి 2 టెరములు పెట్టి మార్కెట్ లో లిక్విడిటీని పెంచేసి రేట్ ఆఫ్ ఇంట్రెస్ట్ రిపో రేట్ పెంచకుండా సో మార్కెట్ లో వచ్చే డబ్బులు పెట్టి గవర్నమెంట్ చీప్ గా బారో చేయాలండి. ఎందుకంటే గవర్నమెంట్ నిజర్లీ 52% బారోయింగ్ మన బడ్జెట్ చీప్ గా బారో చేయాలని. ఇట్లా పొలిటికల్ పొల్యూషన్, ఆర్బీఐ యొక్క ఇండిపెండెంట్ పాలసీని తీసి ఒక బ్యూరోక్రాట్ తెచ్చి 2 టెరములు నాశనం చేసి 4% నుంచి రిపో రేటు పెంచాల. రిటైర్మెంట్ పీపుల్ ఆ డబ్బులు పెట్టుకుంటే దానికి 30,000 వస్తే ట్యాక్స్ కట్టాలి. డబ్బులన్నీ స్టాక్ మార్కెట్ ఆడ పాపం నష్టాలు వచ్చి పంట మునిగిపోతున్నారు. ఇదంతా సిస్టమ్ పొల్యూట్ అయిపోయింది సార్. పొలిటికల్ ఇంటర్ఫరెన్స్ దానికి వేరే మార్గం లేదు. ధన్యవాదాలు రిషి.
Thank you.
James, do you have anything?
Yes, actually, one of the attendees
sent a question to you.
Professor Hrishikesh, that was incredible. That was really wonderful, sir. Your knowledge in economic policy and monetary policy was vast, and you helped us in gaining so much this evening.
Absolutely.
So we enjoyed it a lot. Yeah, we enjoyed it a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I even though I have some questions too, but I'm first asking the questions of Swati. So she is asking how profitable can small scale investments be for the bank post COVID scenario? How profitable can small scale investments be for the bank post COVID scenario?
But please repeat. How?
Yeah. How profitable
How
can small
profitable?
scale investments,
Hmm.
small scale investments be for the banks in the post COVID scenario? I think this question
Hello?
is in the context of MSME.
Yeah.
So can they?
So it's how there is a voice break actually. How profitable a small?
In the context of MSMEs and
Okay.
in the post-COVID scenario, how profitable are the small-scale investments for banks?
Small scale investment for banks.
Yes. How, are they profitable for them, and how do they manage these small-scale investments? How do banks manage these small-scale investments?
So here, can I say that small scale investments means small scale investment in small enterprises? You mean to say?
The small enterprises, sir. Yes,
Small
exactly. For the
enterprise.
MSME.
Okay.
Yes.
MS
Yeah,
small
in the context of
enterprise.
MSME. Yes.
Yes, sir. Here, the one thing is when you look into the number of MSMEs that are there, and particularly today, their spread with regard to even to the international level. Naturally, even you say that the micro enterprise. So today, micro enterprise means which is having the fixed investment in plant and machinery up to the 5 crore rupees. But still, their contribution, because when they are having the 5 crores investment, I'm sure that they can install certain kind of the technology in it. So after all, today what happened is the role and contribution of the MSMEs at the macro level of the economy, either term in terms of exports earnings, or in terms of employment generation, or in terms of even the industrial production. So these all things, naturally they are so really contributing positively. So just like a small unit or the micro unit, so we cannot say insignify the volume of that business that is really done in terms of the economic indicators. So here, the majority of the number of units, if the bank perceive, really they find the potentialities in even the micro units. Because today, the majority of the even certain units which are identified under the micro, so they are having an access to the international markets. So by virtue of their what you call is a product diversification, or even they are say adopting the latest marketing strategies. Sometimes these products of micro units will pose competition to the products of the large scale units in the same market. So if that is the case, the competitiveness of the micro unit is really maintaining an edge over that of the large scale unit, the bank will really find that there is a scope. Because as long as they are maintaining an edge over the other competing units, irrespective of their size, irrespective of their volume, definitely, bank can take it account in a positive way. So they are the real and potential customers. So in that way, if the banks extend such kind of enterprises, definitely, their volume of the banking business will be increased. And as a result, there is a scope for increasing of the profitability of the banks. Because as long that micro unit is really maintaining its a competitive edge in the market, local market, or even the neighboring market, definitely that micro unit will become a successful unit. If it will not, unless it is becoming a sick unit, because when you talk about the sick unit, then naturally the bankers will feel hesitant to extend their finance. But as long as they are sure, at least the minimum basic criteria, okay, the entrepreneur is having the important position and he is maintaining certain kind of a dignity, he is having certain kind of integrity. So naturally, his entrepreneurial skills are very, very, say, at a high level. So naturally, even in the past experience, if you take into account the track record of that same unit in the last, say, a couple of years, they really exhibited wonderful results on the financial front and their balance sheet. Then what is the limiting part for the bank to extend their finance? Happily, they will come forward and they extend the finance. And in that way, the similar units also will be enjoyed. So when they find that the majority number of units are getting the business from the bank, automatically bank find the advance base will be widened, and they will be issued of what you call is recoveries without any kind of limitations. So there is no scope for, and they will not worry about that loan will be in the form of NPA, will become the bad loan. So they need not worry about, because that unit actually testifies, it demonstrated its ability in the competitiveness in the local market situation. So naturally, basing on that positive features, whatever the positive features that particular unit possesses, basing on that, banks will take the advantage out of it, and ultimately the banks can flourish. But if they observe that certain things are going wrong, that unit is not maintaining its efficiency level, and only for the purpose of enjoying certain kind of benefits under the priority sector lending, so under the binomy transaction, or sometimes, so actually only for the sake of, say, diversion of that funds to some other unit, if they have, in no time, that unit will become sick. So if that is the case, the banker must be alert. So that's the reason why post-credit appraisal must be followed. Follow-up of the credit must be taken. There are two kinds of appraisals. One thing is before sanctioning of any kind of a credit by the banker, pre-sanction credit. At the time, they have to, say, execute and exhibit extraordinary prudent care. So relating to the, say, repayment capacity, relating to the activities of that organization, and the past track record, the balance sheets, and even if they are available, the audit reports, these all things they have to look into. And once the loan is sanctioned, then the post follow-up. So whether whatever the fund that is lent to the particular unit is used for the specific purpose, or is there any deviation that is taking place? Sometimes what happened, if for the maintaining of the business unit, the bank extends a loan, but actually that is not taking place. That loan was used for some other purpose. Then when the people actually, the field officers visit the business unit for the purpose of recovery, so sometimes, they won't find anything there. So it will be ultimately culminated in the form of the NPAs.
Thank you, sir. Thank
So
you.
it is not the question of small unit or the big unit, but ultimately the appraisal is to be made by the banker at the pre-sanction level and the post-sanction.
It all depends on the appraisal.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
you. Yeah. Do you have anything, James?
I have one more question.
Yeah,
Please,
go ahead.
sir, please.
Since the post the
Reform period.
financial meltdown of 2008.
2008, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, India has at that juncture, we more or less we were not affected by it.
Yeah.
But after that, we have seen that the financial takeover by the private equity firms.
Yeah.
And banks lost their reputations, and so the lending to the entrepreneurs was taken over by the private equity firms. And now that I think we have seen in reports that these private equity firms own almost a significant chunk of global GDP itself.
Yeah.
And in this context, how do we relate that to India? Because we are now getting into the globalized global financial system. Previously, we were secured from that. Now that scenario we're looking at, and in the context of because our situation, our economy is very, very unique, as you have been covering in all your lecture.
Okay.
And, so, can you please elaborate on it?
Yes,
Sir?
sure. So really, it's a nice question, because so in the year 2008, as you rightly said, the global financial crisis after Lehman Brothers in US, it's a cascading impact is mostly felt on the European and even the American system, banking system. But at that time, the Indian banking system was insulated from the negative impact of that kind. The main reason, and in fact, the same question was posed after the retirement of the then governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Dr. Subbarao Garu. So after retirement, some correspondents actually posed a question, because at that time he was there. What kind of strategy he adopted at that time was, instead of actually tightening the monetary policy at that time, he allowed, as a man at the helm of affairs, he devised a strategy in which monetary easing was taking place, a liberal finance. So even in the context of a global financial crisis, so that he encouraged all the banking institutions to extend the credits very, very liberally, very, very liberally. So as a matter of more zeal and enthusiasm, all the bankers, whether the public sector or the private sector, they extend very, very liberal, and even the rates also, the basic reserve rates by the Reserve Bank of India were also fixed in accordingly. That means what you call is the ultimately even the repo rate or the reverse repo rate or the bank rate or the CRR, these all things were scaled down with an intention to improve the liquidity position of the banking system. Why that was taken once at the point that same question was posed to the governor. So what was his answer was, because of the global financial crisis of 2008, that there was an element of uncertainty and insecurity in the majority of the financial systems of the most of the developed countries, even the developed countries. But here in India, so we wanted to have a reverse trend. We don't want to have similar kind of the thing, means the uncertainty and the negative things that is to be taken place in the Indian financial system. So instead of having such kind of a negative impact on the Indian finance system, what we want to say, first of all, we wanted to create confidence in the minds of the stakeholders that India is not at all to experience any kind of negative impact of the global financial crisis. For that, the additional liquidity is to be dumped into the market. For that, monetary easing was done. So monetary easing was done. So forget about it. That inflation, the targeting, usually people used to talk about the RBIs. Always when they talk about the monetary policy, their major focus must be on the inflation targeting. But here, at the time, the Reserve Bank, what actually did was, instead of going for the containing the inflation and by tightening the money supply in the market, they made measures in order to infuse additional supply so that, the liquidity base of the commercial banks will be widened. So when they find that the banks, when they find that their pockets are full, naturally, in order to take care of the business, they release the sizable quantum of their banking resources to the borrowers, and ultimately at the receiving end. So even after crisis, somewhere else, in the America and the European, say the countries, the beneficiaries and the people say actually felt the pulse of tightening of the monetary controls, whereas in India, it was easy. So there's some kind of a psychological security in order to provide that psychological security for a period of 1 or 2 years up to 2010 and 11. The similar kind of situation was continued, but the thing was after that, because of enthusiastic lendings by the banks, just with an intention to create confidence, psychologically, say positive mindset, here the banks surface with certain kind of a limitation. This, what you call is a reckless or even the casual lending policies of the banking institutions throughout the country ultimately made the banking system to have the increasing of the NPAs. The intention, only one motive behind the liberal, say, monetary easing was to increase the liquidity base in the market, and so that the market stakeholders must not feel that there is an active shortage of the liquidity resources in the market. So to overcome that kind of a psychological, say, restriction or psychological shocks, so here the Reserve Bank of India made ample measures to increase the liquidity. So as a result, more money is flown into the market. So as a result, what you find is economic activity say tended to be high, but ultimately, so the inflation touched the peak, and because of certain kind of casual approach, sometimes on the part of the banking personnel as part of their transactions, so leads to rise in what you call is a bad debts. This what actually was happening.
Thank you, sir.
That's the reason after 2011, the bankers used to make corrective steps to contain inflation.
Yes.
We were more or less protected by stalwarts in our in the RBI.
Yeah.
It's actually, this is mentioned in a book written by Tamil Bandyopadhyay. Say he published a book. He actually was a columnist. Say he published a book on Indian banking So pandemonium actually. So all these what you call is a negative features inherent systems, but somehow say being a person relating to the press, he can quote. But people like us, we are not supposed to take just like that as we feel. So it always we have to make a some kind of a balance. So as an academician, so always we have to say look from the perspectives of academics rather than the politics.
Thank you,
But
sir.
always we have to make a trade-off between these two. That's always.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And may I request Dr. Papa Rao, who is a renowned economist and is a social activist too, and there's a lot of times he has addressed us in Telangana Jana Vedika. Papa Rao, sir.
Please.
Thank you, Ramarao Garu. 1 second, sir. 1 second. Thank you, Ramarao Garu. Thank you.
Sir.
I may not be able to address you for long because just now I came from outside. And
Yes.
let me say, regarding these banks, I think the topic I listened a little. It is regarding the banks,
Yes,
banks and the NPAs and other things
yes,
and
challenge.
privatization. And Sir is telling now about the Lehman Brothers and the what you call NPAs. NPAs are the indebtedness of them and their bankruptcy. And when it comes to the question of the bankruptcy of the 5 major Wall Street banks in the heart of America, the reason for their bankruptcy is just because of there is a word called Ninja loans. Ninja,
Particularly
N-I-N-J-A.
Housing loans.
Ninja loans. So that they are the subprime loans. That is subprime. Subprime is nothing but prime is something everybody knows what is prime. Prime is very valuable. Prime customer is a valuable customer. Subprime is somebody who is not at all valuable and to the bank. Even to those customers who are subprime, who are not valuable, who are not reliable to pay back their loans, even to them, banks gave the loans. American banks gave the loans, even to the subprime customers, not reliable, not having a capacity to pay back. Such customers also the banks gave loans. Such loans are called as the Ninja loans. Ninja means N-I-N-J-A. No income, no job, no assets. The banks gave loans to the people who got no income, no jobs, and no assets to support whatever loans they are taking. Such loans are not really supported. So those loans went bankrupt in United States of America in 2008. Most of those loans were not paid back. That is the reason why the banks went bankrupt. And these loans were given because these banks have given those loans because these banks are greedy for profits. And in 2003, this run for the lending to the housing sector began in 2003. When the interest rates came down, the real estate sector began to grow in America. And in that process, banks began to give huge number of loans and huge amounts of money to the subprime to the customers in the beginning. Once they tasted the success, once they got a lot of money from these customers who are initially they gave only to prime customers. When they are getting very huge profits, they became greedy. By the time it is 2004, 5, 6 and all, they began to lend to even the subprime customers because they became blind with whatever profits they are getting. And what happened is that even these European banks and some of the Japanese banks too, they also lent to the American banks. These Wall Street banks and American banks, they gave their money. European banks and Japanese banks, they gave their money to these banks and asked them to invest it in American real estate customers, to give it as loans to the customers because American banks are getting huge profits with the real estate loans. European banks became, we can also get here. And Japanese banks also became greedy. They also gave their money to American banks to lend to the customers of America. All this money was gone with 2008 subprime customers when they began not to pay back their loans. When these non-paid loans got accumulated so much, and the Wall Street banks began to collapse one after another. Lehman Brothers were the first to collapse. After that, another 5 or 4 banks collapsed. With this, the European banks also lost, Japanese banks lost, but Indian banks were safe at that time. Because Indian banks were in the public sector, They are not greedy and they are not running after profits. They have a social responsibility and they are answerable to the government and to the public, and they have a proper code of conduct and methods of how to give loans and all. They have proper rules, regulations, etc. Despite the fact they have also given many corporate loans that are to the willful defaulters, but still there are number of checks and balances on them because they're the public sector banks. That is why Pranab Mukherjee in 2009, after the 2008 crisis, Pranab Mukherjee, while presenting 2009 budget, he told the parliament that Indian economy was saved because Indian banks are in the public sector. That is one of the major things we have to remember. Now the government is very eager to privatize the public sector by September or so, maybe December. They're very eager to privatize it. Yeah. This is knowing pretty well the fact that Indian banks are so responsible. If it is not for the interference of these politicians at the center like the UPA and NDA, these banks would have been very safe. Because of the interference of these politicians at the center and their undue influence on them, they are giving loans to the corporate sector. And if at all you see, if at all now they are trying to tarnish the image of the public sector banks. Despite that, even of today, as of today, latest position, public sector banks are very safe even today. SBI is sailing very well. Even if you see the stock market today, stock markets of the day, share of the SBI is rising like anything. The fundamentals are good. Even the public sector banks, other public sector banks, despite all the the negative treatment given to them by the central government and the negative propaganda thrown on them by the media, they are doing quite well even in the share market. That is the case. And if you see the private sector banks for that matter, if you say that if this propaganda is true and only public sector banks are incurring losses, that is not right, because the private sector banks are also incurring losses. Of late, many banks like Yes Bank in troubles, always it goes into troubles. Every day and night it will be in trouble. And Punjab and Maharashtra Bank, how it has gone there. Charminar Bank previously in our experience in Hyderabad. So many banks in the private sector before our very eyes are going bankrupt and they have to be rescued by the government. And government, when it comes to the government banks, who is going to rescue them? Nobody is rescuing them. Government has to come to them. Government has to rescue them because it is because of the government's interference they are going bankrupt or they are incurring NPAs. Government, in fact, is not helping them. Is trying to throw them into the lap of the private sector. That is one of the reasons. And if you have gone back before the 1967 or 69 nationalization of the banks, 69. Before that, if you see, hundreds of private sector banks became bankrupt. Take the data. About 300 private sector banks were bankrupt since independence in this country. That is why people lost trust in those banks. And even those banks that were doing well in the private sector, they are giving loans only to corporate sector and the rich people at that time. The loans given to agriculture are only 2% of the total loans given by them to the private sector, to the agriculture. They're giving of all the total loans, they're giving 2% only they're giving to agriculture. And then it is at that time when people are afraid of keeping any money in the private banks, and the priority sectors in this country are not getting any proper treatment from the private sector banks. Government has nationalized these banks, and we were successful in raising the investments in agriculture to 18%, the target level we wanted to reach. 18% of the total investments went into agriculture because of the private nationalization. So many changes have come about. Priority sector got a lot of impact, a lot of priority, lot of importance in the nationalized banks after that, 1967 or 69. So then if you see that after the reform started, in 1990s, the reform started, the policies of the RBI began to change and they became pro-corporate. That is the reason till then they are trying, from the last 30 years, they are trying to throw these public sector banks into the lap of the private sector, but they could not succeed well. Now that is why it is government of India now under NDA is trying very rudely to privatize them, very rudely, despite the fact they are not in losses. Many of them are not in losses. So this is what is happening. And I tell you, if at all these banks are to be privatized, it won't be far away. When we have to fight another independence struggle. Already whatever struggles are happening, 28th and 29th, there is a big nationwide strike of the working class. All the informal and formal workers went on strike. And before that, the farmers came onto the highways of Delhi and all. They are occupying those streets and they are protesting there. And now these are all part of the independence struggle. Already we are launching in order to get in order to liberate ourselves from the clutches of the private corporate sector of of India and global level also. Foreign and Indian corporate sector has already taken over a lot of our public sectors profit assets and all. You can see in ports, airports, and Visakhapatnam is already on the agenda. Banks are on the agenda. Even the agriculture there is an attempt to corporatize it. We are resisting, but they are trying to do. That is why Tomar, Agricultural Minister Narendra Tomar told, we have withdrawn the bills. That does not mean that we are throwing them away, sort of. We are going to bring them again, sort of. So that is why we are fighting an independence struggle already. Already we are in between we are in the thick of the battle to save our country's sovereignty, our people's livelihoods. This very big battle is going on, and in the future, it will be very clear even to the middle classes. It will be very clear even to the middle classes that we lost our independence. The corporate sector is the ruler of this country. Foreign and Indian corporate sector together, they have joined hands and ruling this country, and they are squeezing the people of this country. There are no livelihoods, there are no proper wages, and there is a K-shaped growth. The K means, you all know, K is whereby one thing, the upper line will be going up and the lower line will be going down. K, that upper line is the line of the rich. Rich people are going up, they are becoming richer, and poor people are becoming poorer. This K-shaped growth has already taken over. People's livelihoods are under threat. And if you see in this situation, even the private sector is not doing, they're covering up the fact. Now, because the corporate loans have gone, some of them genuinely have gone NPAs, the public sector suffered. But after the COVID, we all are finding that retail loans are also going NPAs. Many retail loans are also becoming NPAs, and many of the middle classes are mortgaging their gold in the banks. Lot of gold of the middle classes is with the banks now, because they have mortgaged, because they lost the livelihoods, wages and all. They're trying to survive by mortgaging the gold. Most of this gold with the middle classes is already mortgaged with the banks. And when it comes to the retail loans, the private sector banks are the banks that are dominating in the retail loans, whereas corporate loans are being mostly held by the public sector banks. The private sector banks like ICICI, HDFC, and all these are having most of the loans they hold are the loans of the retail sector. Now, when the retail loans are going into trouble, they are becoming NPAs. Retail loans are becoming NPAs these days most of the time, and MSME loans also are going NPAs. That is why when retail loans are becoming bankrupt these days, they are going NPAs. Even the private sector is incurring the losses, because previously private sector losses are low because their corporate loan lending also is low. But with the retail loans going bankrupt or NPAs now, even the private sector is facing heat. That is why there is no bank that is really exempt from the NPAs. All the banks are having NPAs, and supposedly well-managed private sector banks are also having NPAs. And the public sector banks, because of their undue treatment by the government, are suffering the NPAs, not just because of their real nature or whatever it might be. That is why what I want to say finally is that this country is facing a war between justice and injustice, a war between the interests of the common man, interests of the middle classes, and the interests of the poor, and the interests of the rich. There is a class war that is going on. It is a simple thing. There is a class war, and this government wants to take openly the side of the corporates, and a lot of welfare this government is providing to people now, because they want to keep the people sedated. They are providing free grain and all to many people. Perhaps this scheme might continue till 2024. Free grain scheme. Free grain they are giving to everybody. This is only they are trying to keep the people sedated. This is like a what you call opium, like free grain, because people even are not having even food. Majority of the people are not having even food to eat. They are throwing them some grain in their face, and they're doing whatever they want to do. Just they're spending how much? 1,000 crores they're spending in Uttar Pradesh every month on the grain scheme, free distribution of grains. 1,000 crores they are spending every month in Uttar Pradesh. Total comes to 12,000 crores every year. with 12,000 crore every year in Uttar Pradesh, and maybe another 1,20,000, total of 1,20,000 crore per year throughout the country. They are providing grains, and many times that amount they are squandering from the people, they are squeezing from the people and surrendering to the corporates. See the petrol and diesel taxes,
Yes.
how much they are getting. 1,20,000 crore perhaps if they spend on the grain scheme to grains, providing grains to the people throughout the country. Many times to that they are getting from petrol and diesel tax. And all that money is going into the coffers of the corporates.
Thank you,
Coffers of
sir.
the corporates.
Thank
It's
you,
a
sir.
fact. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does anybody want to have any question? Please raise your hand. Okay. Yeah. Before closing, I have a small question, sir.
Yes.
With the rapid urbanization and totally the rural economy is in squanders now. The government and the bankers are not encouraging any rural economy. The rural economy. So, what the rural economy, what the bankers are giving a crop loans and loans to tractors. They have forgotten the cottage industry like pottery, carpentry, all these industries which, as Gandhiji said, the Gram Swaraj will come from the rural economy, but they have forgotten. Now, how do we expect these bankers to go and really help the rural class when the government is encouraging rapid urbanization? There's a crisis of water, housing, security for women. Urbanization is because it's a biggest crime in this country. Now, how do you expect the bankers to go to the villages? Like Paparao Garu just now said that there should be another national movement for independence. This is again a movement for equality. Economic. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
May no, after you finish the question, may I answer the question?
Sure,
For
sure.
3-4 minutes.
Sure,
Like
sir.
that. Okay.
Please,
Sure,
sir. Please,
sure.
sir.
So, with this, we are fighting for an economic equality now. So, the education which we are getting today is of no use to anybody. Because Telangana Jana Vedika, which is striving hard to educate people, get the masses into the national forum.
National mainstream.
Yeah, mainstream. But when, like what Paparagar just now said, people are being sedated. How do we expect the bankers and the civil society to come and fight for the cause of the people? Thank you, sir.
Sir, may I start?
Yes.
Aparo. Sir, that is a simple thing. You are telling that rural areas are being neglected. That is true, and urbanization is a crime. Yes, true. Because but they are interconnected. The rural neglect of the rural areas and pandering to the urban areas are interconnected, because it is in the very reforms that are taking place in this country since 1990s. This negligence of the rural areas is there. They need to neglect the rural areas in order to cater to the needs of the urban corporate sector or the urban capitalists. Because unless there are two reasons for this. Unless you don't give sufficient profits, or unless you don't give sufficient remuneration to the rural agriculturalist, you cannot procure or you cannot get whatever they produce to the urban areas at a low cost.
Exactly.
If you are remunerating them properly, if you are remunerating the rural agriculturalist in a proper way, if you pay them full whatever they deserve, the cost of the agricultural products in the urban areas will increase. This is what the reforms don't want to happen. Because if the cost of the agricultural products in the urban areas increases, the urban employees and the urban poor workers, they will protest against their owners or these managements in order to get wage hikes. They want the rise in the wages. So in order to keep the urban workers and the urban middle classes satisfied with whatever the prices are there in the urban, in the markets in the urban areas. The agricultural commodities have to come into urban areas at a lower price. Forget the middlemen and all. That's one. That is a different logic. That is another logic. Middlemen increase the price and all that happens, and the traders increase the prices. That is another logic. But the systemic logic of the reforms is that you should get the rural agricultural products into the urban areas at a lower price, so that there won't be any urban unrest on prices, unrest for wage hike. Because corporates have to pay out more to the workers and the employees if there are more prices at the market. That is one reason. Second reason is that if you pay satisfactorily to the agriculturalists in the rural areas, if they are happy with their agriculture, if they are really remunerated, they won't leave the rural areas.
Correct.
They will stay back there. They will stay back there. Then there won't be any migration. That what Ramarao Garu is saying, the urbanization crime, that won't happen. Because if there is no migration into the urban areas, if the agriculture is profitable, there won't be migration. If there is no migration into the urban areas, there won't be proper labor supply for the urban corporates and the capitalists. If there is no proper labor supply, abundance of labor supply to the corporates and capitalists in the urban areas, the demand for the wages in the urban areas will increase. If there are number of workers and poor people coming into the urban areas, and there is a lot of supply of the labor, the wages of the labor tend to come down. That is what they want. The wages of the labor should be lower. That will happen only if there is more of labor supply into the urban areas. There are more laborers competing against each other. If there are more laborers competing against each other for a particular work or a job, the wage will come down because of the competition between the workers and the employees. So this is the second thing they want. I tell you a small example and leave it there. Remember, this is about 15th century or so. There are laws called as the Karan laws. Karan, Mokazona. There are laws called as the Karan laws in England at that time. At that time, England is majorly agricultural. The Karan laws were there in that country because, according to those laws, Karan should not be imported into England. Because if Karan is imported into England, the price of the Karan will fall down. Will come down because agriculturalists in England are producing corn. They made a law. They made a law via their parliament or their king not to import any corn into England. That is how the agriculturalists in England got a lot of price for their corn. They have high price for corn there at that time because agriculture is the dominant mode of living. Agriculturalists are the landlords are the major force in that country. After that, industrialization took place. Corporates and capitalists became important in England. And after that, when corporates and capitalists became important in England, and when urbanization crime took place in England, the urbanization crime combined with the corporate interest and the capitalist interest wanted the corn to be low, corn price to be low. Because if corn price is not low, urban workers will protest for higher wages. So then what they did is that they pressurized the parliament, urban capitalists, and when they became powerful, capitalists and the urban people, urban rich people, they pressurized the parliament. When they became powerful enough, they pressurized the English parliament and made it repeal the Karan laws. Repeal the Karan laws. Karan laws were repealed. Then Karan can be imported into England. When it is imported into England, there is a lot of supply along with the local production. That is how the Karan prices came down in England in the interest of the corporate class. That is why rural interests and urban interests are antithetical under the neoliberal reforms that are taking place in this country. That is why you can always expect, unless you throw away the reforms, whether Congress or the BJP, unless they leave the reforms, or unless these two parties are thrown away. If they don't leave the reforms, unless they are thrown away, there can be no justice to the rural poor and rural agriculturalists. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation.
Yes, sir. Very nice, sir. Sir, Rishikesh Rao garu, you want to say something, sir?
Yeah. So here, the role of banking system with regard to the rural development or rural economic activity. Even today, we can say that under the guise of financial inclusion, there are a lot of initiatives, even in the absence of a bank branch. Today, we have been seeing the presence of business correspondents and the business facilitators who actually do on behalf of the banking activity. So naturally, so these rural branches sometimes, what actually they do, they will extend all kinds of facilities to the people, say, forming under the groups of self-help groups. They are very, very popular. So in the rural area, so naturally they find some kind of an economic activity among themselves. In order to say widen their activities of business, they're actually having an easier access to the nearest public sector rural branch, and thereby the banks concerned are able to so actually expand the credit portfolio to them. So in course of time, what actually is the kind of business that is being done between the self-help groups and the banking are compounded, and voluminous the interaction will be taking place, and ultimately the banks, even in terms of recoveries also, the whatever the loans that are extended to the self-help groups in the rural area, it's almost 90% is the recovery. So in that case, definitely we say that the banking activity, even today, we say that the urban orientation and urbanization has been the priority. Still, the public sector banks, so 33% of their branches still they are found in the rural area. So definitely, irrespective of the fact whether they are incurring the losses or earning the profits, but whatever the things they are doing, say in extending the rural infrastructure finance, or even extending the financial requirements of the divergent sections of underprivileged, inaccessible sections of the population. So these all things, have been done. So as part of financial inclusion initiatives, so simply we can say that the aspirations of the rural people or the requirements of the rural population from the banking network is completely ignored. So to some extent, they are being taken care under the intensive programs. And for example, if you take the case of the implementation of the lead bank scheme, back in the year 1969, the lead bank scheme basing on the Nariman committee that was constituted. And as per the lead bank scheme, planning of the district, actually district as a unit, at the district level, the planning for the actual requirements, the credit requirements, and even the resource mobilization, there will be, say, some kind of a fixation of the targets among all the public sector banks, the private sector banks, and a public sector bank will be acted as a lead bank. It prepares the district credit plans, and in conjunction with the government officials, they used to finalize the plans, and accordingly, the banks in that area, say, used to extend all kinds of credit facilities. So in that way, I am sure that, so definitely even in the rural areas also are getting the appropriate attention from the branches of the public sector banks too. That is my wish.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Yeah, I now request Manoj Reddy to propose a vote of thanks, and we'll close the session. And it was really a wonderful session. I'm very happy that you have really have enlightened us with the system here.
Yes.
Manoj, are you there? Manoj. Oh. Yeah. Anyway, Manoj, I think is gone.
Okay, sir.
So it's a long marathon session. Thank you so much. And I, on behalf of myself and the members of Telangana Jana Vedika, thank you profusely for addressing us and enlightening us. And we'll try to implement your thought process in our, in our every meeting. Thank you so much, sir. And I thank you all for attending this one marathon session. And in spite of you having a family get together today, you have addressed us. I'm very happy, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience caused for you, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. It was really a privilege. It was really a privilege.